The war did not announce the crisis, it erupted into it. In the winter of 1944, the forests of the Ardennes became a battlefield not by design, but by shock. Snow muted sound, fog erased distance. Roads that had carried supply and routine only days before now funneled confusion, retreat, and sudden violence. What had been a quiet sector of the Allied line collapsed under the weight of surprise, and the Western Front lurched backward into uncertainty. This was the moment the war in the West nearly unraveled. German forces surged forward through terrain the Allies believed unsuitable for a major offensive. Armored columns punched through thin defenses. Infantry infiltrated through forests and villages. Communications failed. Units became isolated without warning. The front did not bend gradually. It fractured, and creating gaps no map could accurately capture. At the center of the crisis was time. Every hour mattered. Every delay compounded risk. Every miscalculation widened the breach. As Allied commands struggled to stabilize the situation, one force stood positioned to determine whether the offensive would succeed or fail. George S. Patton's Third Army was already moving, not because the situation was clear, but because Patton had prepared for uncertainty long before it arrived. Patton did not see the Ardennes as an anomaly. He saw it as inevitability. The Third Army had been built for momentum. Its commanders were drilled to act under pressure. Its staff was trained to plan, not just for what was expected, but for what could go wrong. When the German offensive erupted, and Patton did not need time to decide what to do. He needed only the authority to do it. And when that authority came, the response was immediate. The Third Army pivoted north into winter combat under the most demanding conditions imaginable. Roads were frozen. Fuel was scarce. Visibility was measured in yards. Entire formations were redirected while already in motion. Their supply lines stretched and reshaped on the fly. This was not a single maneuver. It was sustained control under chaos. Columns advanced through snow-choked roads and contested villages, often without full knowledge of enemy strength ahead. Units entered combat piecemeal, accepting risk because hesitation meant surrendering initiative. Artillery was brought forward over ice. Engineers cleared routes under fire. Infantry fought delaying actions, assaults, and relief operations simultaneously. The Third Army was no longer attacking or defending. It was stabilizing the war. At Bastogne, Patton's forces cracked the siege that threatened to anchor the German advance. Elsewhere, Third Army units absorbed pressure, sealed gaps, and forced the enemy to fight for every mile gained. The German offensive began to slow, not because it had failed outright, but because momentum was being stripped away hour by hour. The Ardennes became a battle of endurance. Weather punished movement. Supply strained under distance. Exhaustion became universal. And yet, the Third Army continued to function, advancing, reinforcing, and counterattacking, while the situation remained fluid and dangerous. It did not wait for perfect conditions. It created them through pressure. As the offensive stalled, Patton's army shifted again. Relief became pursuit. Containment became collapse. The Bulge narrowed under sustained force. What had begun as a German gamble now turned inward on itself. Its fuel burned, its coordination broken, its timetable destroyed. The Third Army did not deliver a single dramatic blow. It applied relentless operational weight until the structure could no longer hold. Patton's Third Army in the Ardennes was not about spectacle. It was about control, about preparation meeting crisis, about an army that could move, fight, and adapt, while others struggled simply to orient themselves. It proved that leadership was not only about aggression, but about readiness revealed at the worst possible moment. This was the Third Army's winter war, fought in forests, snow, and urgency, fought without pause, fought until the crisis broke. This is the story of Patton's Third Army in the Ardennes, where movement, pressure, and discipline turned shock into recovery and set the conditions for victory in the West. December 15th, 1944, Nancy, France. In a requisitioned French villa serving as Third Army headquarters, staff officers string lights across war-damaged walls while a gramophone plays Bing Crosby's White Christmas on crackling repeat. Colonel Paul Harkins balances on a wooden chair, attempting to hang mistletoe above a doorway where General George Patton will pass during tomorrow's planned Christmas party. Outside, temperatures hover around 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Light snow dusts the cobblestones. Nobody in this room knows that in less than 72 hours, these decorations will hang forgotten in an abandoned headquarters, and every man here will be racing north through frozen darkness toward a battle none of them anticipated. The Third Army on this quiet December evening stretches across 90 miles of front, from Metz in the south to Luxembourg in the north. Over 250,000 men occupy positions in what military planners call a quiet sector, the kind of assignment given to armies preparing for their next offensive, not defending against enemy attack. Patton's forces are coiled for a massive strike into Germany's industrial Saar region, scheduled to begin December 19th. Supply dumps overflow with ammunition. Artillery pieces sit registered on German positions across the border. Tank battalions have rehearsed their routes through minefields. The 4th Armored Division, the Third Army's elite striking force, runs final maintenance checks on their Sherman tanks, changing oil in the cold, tightening treads, loading shells into ready racks. In company mess tents, cooks plan Christmas dinner menus featuring turkey shipped from the States, canned cranberry sauce, and whatever vegetables French farmers might sell them. The war feels predictable again after the chaos of summer's breakout from Normandy. At 5:30 on the morning of December 16th, radio operators in Third Army's communications section begin receiving fragmented reports from the north. American units of First Army's 8th Corps, holding the Ardennes forest sector, report heavy German artillery fire. The initial assessments dismiss it as harassment, perhaps a local counterattack, nothing more. By mid-morning, the reports intensify. Multiple divisions under attack, breakthrough in several sectors, communications lost with forward battalions. Staff officers cluster around maps, tracing fingers along the Ardennes region's forested terrain, that supposedly impassable landscape military planners deem too difficult for major operations. Someone mentions the words no one wants to hear: German offensive. In the Third Army Situation Room, operations officers begin making phone calls, their voices steady but urgent, requesting clarification from higher headquarters. The answers they receive are confused, contradictory, insufficient. December 18th arrives with Patton's Chief of Staff, Brigadier General Hobart Gay, receiving the telephone call that will redefine the Third Army's war. Now, Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force requests Patton's presence at an emergency conference in Verdun tomorrow morning, 1100 hours. The subject, redirecting Third Army northward to counterattack the German penetration. Gay finds Patton in his office, studying maps of the Saar offensive that will now never happen. When Gay delivers the message, Patton's response is immediate. What the hell took them so long? This reaction, often portrayed as prescient genius, actually reflects something Patton's staff has known for months. Their commander insisted they prepare contingency plans for every conceivable scenario, including this one. 3 weeks earlier, Patton ordered his operations officer, Colonel Halley Maddox, to wargame exactly this situation. What if the Germans attack through the Ardennes? How fast can Third Army wheel north? What routes would we use? The plans exist, filed and ready, because Patton's particular form of aggressive confidence demands preparation for even unlikely possibilities. Across Third Army positions on December 18th, soldiers experience the peculiar military phenomenon of suddenly canceled plans. The 80th Infantry Division, positioned near Luxembourg, receives orders to halt preparations for the Saar offensive. The 26th Infantry Division gets movement orders north, but no explanation why. Tank crews of the 4th Armored Division drain fuel from vehicles prepared for one battle and begin loading completely different ammunition loads for a different kind of fight. Nobody tells them they are going to relieve Bastogne. Most haven't heard of Bastogne yet. They know only that something significant is happening, something that requires the entire army to change direction. In supply depots, quartermasters hastily recalculate logistics. The carefully accumulated ammunition for an offensive into Germany now must be redistributed for a defensive operation in Belgium. Fuel trucks need rerouting. Medical units require different positioning. Everything changes, and it changes without the luxury of time to plan properly. The Christmas decorations in Patton's headquarters hang untouched through December 19th and 20th. Officers rush past the mistletoe without noticing it. The gramophone sits silent. In the office where Colonel Harkins had planned to serve eggnog to visiting commanders, staff officers now huddle over maps marked with red pencil, showing German penetrations reaching 30, and then 40, then 50 miles into American lines. The scale of the German offensive becomes clearer with each passing hour. This is not a local counterattack. This is Operation Watch on the Rhine. Hitler's desperate gamble to split Allied forces, recapture Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace in the West. Over 200,000 German troops, supported by nearly 1,500 tanks and assault guns, have crashed through American positions held by just 4 divisions, covering an impossibly wide front. Towns with names most Americans cannot pronounce, Clairvaux, Wiltz, Houffalize, Bastogne, become coordinates on maps, objectives, problems to solve. The human dimension of this strategic crisis exists in details the headquarters staff learned secondhand. 8th Corps units, shattered by the initial assault, retreat through snow and darkness. American soldiers, some still in summer weight uniforms because winter gear hasn't reached them, freeze while fighting rearguard actions against German panzer columns. Belgian civilians flee their homes for the second time in 5 years, pushing handcarts piled with possessions through frozen roads, clogged with American trucks, moving both forward and back in a confusion that characterizes the first 72 hours of the German offensive. Wounded men lie in aid stations that must evacuate ahead of German advance, loaded into ambulances that may or may not reach hospitals before being overrun. One report describes American military police directing traffic at a crossroads under German artillery fire, maintaining order while everything around them disintegrates into chaos. At Third Army headquarters, the Christmas party menu gets repurposed. The turkey allocated for soldiers' celebration will instead feed headquarters staff working through the holiday. The gramophone with its Christmas records gets packed away. On December 19th, Patton departs for Verdun with his operations and logistics chiefs, leaving Gay to manage the monumental task of turning an entire army 90 degrees in winter conditions. Before leaving, Patton issues one final instruction to his staff. Drive the men hard. If we don't relieve Bastogne in 72 hours, we won't relieve it at all. This deadline, seemingly arbitrary, actually reflects Patton's understanding that surrounded American forces can hold only as long as their ammunition lasts, approximately 3 to 4 days given the intensity of combat. After that, Bastogne falls, and the German breakthrough widens. The snow continues falling on Nancy through December 20th. In the abandoned party room, the Christmas lights eventually burn out, one bulb at a time. The mistletoe dries and curls. The carefully planned celebration that would have marked a moment of relative peace in a year of continuous combat never happens. Instead, those same officers who would have raised glasses together now work 18-hour shifts coordinating the movement of over 133,000 vehicles northward through 3 major highways inadequate for the traffic volume. They track divisions by unit designation and map coordinates, watching blue pins representing American forces creep north, while red pins showing German positions push west. They calculate casualties and estimates. Thus, knowing precise numbers won't emerge for days. They plan operations knowing their information is already outdated by the time it reaches them. This is the unglamorous reality of military command, not dramatic speeches or heroic gestures, but exhausted men pushing pins across maps and trying to transform chaos into something resembling organized action. December the 21st arrives with the Third Army fully committed to movement. The forward edge of Patton's forces crosses into Luxembourg, heading toward contact with German units that have, in 5 days, achieved what seemed impossible, a major offensive that threatens to reverse 6 months of Allied gains. The stakes of this operation exceed the simple relief of one surrounded town. If the German offensive succeeds in reaching the Meuse River and driving toward Antwerp, it could split Allied forces, isolate British armies in the north, and prolong the European war by months or even years. If Third Army fails to halt the German advance, the carefully constructed Allied coalition might fracture under recriminations about who failed to predict this attack, who deployed forces incorrectly, who responded too slowly. The psychological impact on Allied soldiers and civilians back home could be devastating. The shock of realizing German forces retain offensive capability might undermine public support for continuing the war. Everything Patton's army accomplished in the race across France, the reduction of Metz, the advance to the German border, all of it becomes meaningless if they cannot stop this German thrust. The Christmas party that never happened represents more than canceled celebration. It marks the moment when the war everyone thought was winding down revealed itself as far from finished. December 19th, 1944, 1100 hours. The Alpha Barracks in Verdun, France, a stone-walled former French military academy, now serving as temporary headquarters for the emergency conference. General Dwight Eisenhower enters the cold room where his commanders wait, their breath visible in air barely warmed by a struggling coal stove. Lieutenant General Omar Bradley stands near a wall map marked with red arrows showing German penetrations. Lieutenant General Jacob Devers represents forces to the south. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery will participate by telephone from the north. And Lieutenant General George Patton sits near the window, uncharacteristically quiet, a small notebook open on his knee. Eisenhower's face shows the strain of 72 hours without sleep, managing a crisis that threatens to destroy his reputation and potentially the Allied cause itself. Eisenhower begins without preamble. The German offensive has created a bulge in Allied lines 50 miles deep and 60 miles wide. American casualties already exceed 10,000 men, with hundreds more captured. Entire regiments have been overrun. The town of Bastogne, a critical road junction, remains surrounded by German forces that bypass it rather than reducing it through siege. First Army Commander Lieutenant General Courtney Hodges struggles to organize coherent defensive positions from shattered units. The question Eisenhower poses to his commanders is simple and terrible. How do we stop this? Bradley suggests containing the shoulders of the breakthrough, preventing further widening. Devers proposes withdrawing forces from the south to create reserves. Montgomery, speaking through the crackling telephone connection, advocates for pulling back to more defensible positions. Each commander offers variations on defensive thinking, purchasing time to organize a proper counteroffensive. Patton's intervention cuts through the defensive mindset like a blade. "When can you attack?" Eisenhower asks him directly. Patton's response becomes the defining moment of his military career. The morning of December 22nd, with 3 full divisions. The room goes silent. Bradley, who knows Patton better than anyone present, says slowly, "Don't be fatuous, George." The disbelief is understandable. Patton's Third Army sits 90 miles south of Bastogne, while engaged in active operations against German positions on the Saar front. Disengaging from contact with the enemy, turning 6 divisions north, moving them through winter conditions on inadequate roads, and launching a coordinated attack, all in 72 hours, violates every conventional military timeline. Staff officers typically calculate such movements in weeks, not days. Yet, Patton insists it's possible, and his certainty seems either inspired confidence or dangerous delusion. What the commanders in that room don't fully grasp is that Patton's promise isn't improvisation. 3 weeks earlier, on December 2nd, Patton gathered his senior staff for what he called a what-if planning session. Oscar Koch, his intelligence officer, had reported signs of German forces massing in the Eifel region opposite the Ardennes. While higher headquarters dismissed these indicators as defensive preparations, Patton ordered Maddox to prepare contingency plans. 3 specific scenarios. First, a concentrated attack with the 4th Armored Division and 2 infantry divisions on a narrow front. Second, a broader attack with 4 divisions on a wider front. Third, a complete wheel of the entire Third Army from east to north. Each plan received a code word: nickel, quicksilver, and undertone. The staff officers thought it an academic exercise, preparing for a situation that would never occur. They completed the plans anyway, calculating road movements, fuel requirements, ammunition redistribution, and timeline estimates. Those plans now sit in Maddox's briefcase. Eisenhower, desperate for any option that seizes initiative from the Germans, authorizes Patton's attack. The Supreme Commander needs something to tell Washington and London besides, "We're containing the situation." A counteroffensive, even a hasty one, provides the psychological reassurance that Allied forces retain offensive capability. Eisenhower also understands that speed matters more than perfect preparation. Every hour of delay allows German panzer divisions to penetrate deeper toward the Meuse River. If they reach it and cross, the entire strategic situation in Western Europe transforms catastrophically. Better to attack with 3 divisions immediately than wait a week for 6 divisions. Before the conference ends, Patton makes a telephone call to his headquarters in Nancy. He speaks one word: nickel. At Third Army headquarters, staff officers who participated in the December 2nd planning session immediately pull the relevant files and begin executing predetermined orders. The mythology surrounding Patton's Verdun promise often portrays it as lone genius against bureaucratic skepticism. The reality reveals more complex organizational dynamics. Patton's chief of staff, Gay, had already begun preliminary movements before the Verdun conference, redirecting supply convoys and alerting division commanders to prepare for rapid deployment. Walter Mueller, the logistics officer responsible for moving over 130,000 vehicles, had spent 3 weeks calculating road capacities and traffic control requirements for exactly this scenario. Robert Allen, the communications officer, thus had pre-positioned radio relay stations along the routes Third Army would use moving north. Even Patton's famous 72-hour timeline came from Maddox's staff calculations, not pulled from thin air. What appears to be individual brilliance actually represents organizational competence, the ability of a military staff to prepare for contingencies and execute complex operations under pressure. The return journey from Verdun to Nancy takes Patton through territory where his army is already moving north. En route Nationale 3 near Thionville, his staff car encounters the lead elements of the 4th Armored Division heading to Luxembourg. Tank columns stretch beyond sight, engines rumbling, treads clanking against frozen pavement. Soldiers in the open turrets wave at the 3-star pennant on Patton's vehicle. Some shout questions. "Where we going, General? How long we got? We gonna make it?" Patton orders his driver to stop. Standing on the running board of his car, addressing tank crews who can barely hear him over engine noise, Patton delivers the message he'll repeat dozens of times over the next 72 hours. "We're going to relieve Bastogne. We're going to show these German bastards they made a mistake. Drive hard, move fast, kill everything that gets in your way." The tankers cheer, though many privately wonder if their general understands how far they must travel, how little time they have, how unprepared they are for winter combat. Back at Nancy headquarters, the operations room transforms into controlled chaos. Staff officers work in shifts, sleeping in chairs when exhaustion overwhelms them, only surviving on coffee and sandwiches delivered from the kitchen. Maddox coordinates division movements, ensuring units don't collide at road junctions. Mueller argues with transportation officers about fuel priorities, deciding which units get the limited supply of diesel and which must wait. Koch updates intelligence estimates every 6 hours, trying to determine which German units Third Army will face upon arrival in the Ardennes. Telephone operators connect calls to subordinate commands, their voices hoarse from repeating orders. A map on the wall tracks every division's location, updated with grease pencil marks as reports arrive. The careful plan developed in December becomes something messier in execution, improvisation within a framework, adaptation to circumstances the planning couldn't predict. The 72 hours between Verdun and the attack reveal the hidden machinery of military operations. While popular imagination focuses on Patton's dramatic promise, the actual work falls to thousands of soldiers whose names never appear in histories. Military police sergeants stand at crossroads for 16-hour shifts, directing traffic in freezing temperatures, preventing the gridlock that would paralyze the entire movement. Truck drivers push through exhaustion and icy roads, knowing a single accident could block entire columns. Maintenance crews work through nights, repairing vehicles that break down, cannibalizing parts from disabled trucks to keep others running. Supply sergeants redistribute ammunition from depots, prepared for the Saar offensive, to trucks heading toward Bastogne. Field kitchens serve meals at odd hours to accommodate units moving at different times. This unglamorous, exhausting work makes Patton's promise achievable. On December 21st, with the attack scheduled for the following morning, Patton visits forward positions where lead elements prepare to jump off. He finds soldiers sleeping in trucks, too tired to erect tents. He sees tanks with crews who haven't bathed in 4 days, sustained by cold rations because field kitchens can't keep pace with the advance. He encounters traffic jams where entire battalions sit motionless for hours, burning precious fuel while waiting for roads to clear. The reality confronting him bears little resemblance to the crisp lines on headquarters maps. Yet when subordinate commanders request delays, additional preparation time, better intelligence before attacking, Patton refuses. "We attack tomorrow morning as scheduled. We promised Eisenhower 72 hours. We're going to deliver 72 hours. This stubbornness, whether viewed as admirable determination or reckless inflexibility, defines Patton's approach. He understands that in war, adequate preparation matters less than seizing the psychological initiative. The Germans expect American forces to recoil, reorganize, and counterattack methodically. Patton intends to shock them by attacking before they believe it possible, even if that attack launches from imperfect preparation. December 20th, 1944, 0300 hours. A military police sergeant named Walter Harrison stands at a crossroads outside Thionville, France, and his flashlight beam cutting through falling snow as he directs a column of tank destroyers northward on Route Nationale 3. He's been on duty for 11 hours, will remain for 7 more, and hasn't eaten since the previous afternoon. Every 15 minutes, another convoy approaches his position, sometimes tanks, sometimes trucks, sometimes artillery tractors hauling guns too heavy for the frozen roads. Harrison's job is simple and absolutely critical: keep traffic flowing, prevent jams, ensure units maintain proper spacing. If vehicles bunch too closely, a single breakdown blocks everyone behind it. If gaps open too wide, convoys fragment and commanders lose control of their units. Harrison executes this task with a flashlight and hand signals, choreographing a mechanical ballet of military vehicles that, strung end to end, would stretch over 70 miles. The movement of Third Army northward represents one of the largest road marches in American military history, and it happens under conditions that make every mile an achievement. 3 main highways connect Third Army positions in the Metz-Nancy area with Luxembourg: Route Nationale 3 through Thionville, Route Nationale 18 through Longwy, and a secondary road through Arlon. Military planners calculate road capacity in vehicles per hour, how many trucks or tanks can traverse a single highway lane without creating dangerous congestion. Under ideal conditions, a well-managed highway moves approximately 1,400 vehicles hourly. But December 1944 provides nothing close to ideal conditions. Temperatures drop to 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Ice coats the pavement. Thaw snow reduces visibility. Vehicles without winter modifications slide on hills, stall at intersections, break down from cold-induced mechanical failures. The theoretical capacity of 1,400 vehicles per hour collapses to perhaps 800 in reality. Yet, over 133,000 vehicles must use these roads in approximately 72 hours. Muller, Third Army's logistics chief, solves this impossible equation through ruthless prioritization. Combat units move first. Tanks, infantry carriers, artillery. Support vehicles follow. Ammunition trucks, fuel tankers, field kitchens. Everything else waits. Administrative personnel, construction equipment, maintenance workshops. All the normal support tail of a military army gets left behind. Units move with only essential supplies, and carrying enough ammunition and fuel for the initial attack, but nothing extra. This creates enormous risk. If the attack stalls and supply trucks can't reach forward positions, units run out of ammunition within days. Muller accepts this risk because the alternative, methodical movement with full logistics support, requires weeks rather than hours. War demands impossible choices, and Muller chooses speed over sustainability. The human dimension of this movement emerges in testimonies soldiers record later. Private Eugene Luciano, 4th Armored Division, rides in an open half-track for 48 consecutive hours from Havricourt to Luxembourg. The temperature never rises above 20 degrees. He, and 15 other soldiers huddle together for warmth, rotating positions so everyone gets time in the slightly warmer center of the vehicle. They wear every piece of clothing they possess: undershirts, shirts, wool sweaters, field jackets, overcoats, and still shiver uncontrollably. When the convoy halts for unexplained delays, men jump down and run in place to maintain circulation. Luciano later describes watching a soldier develop hypothermia during the journey, the man's speech slurring, his movements becoming sluggish, until medics pull him from the vehicle at a checkpoint and send him to the rear. The soldier survives, but never rejoins his unit. This scene repeats hundreds of times across the movement. December 21st brings the movement's worst crisis. At Longwy, where Route Nationale 18 crosses the French-Belgian border, two divisions converge simultaneously. The 80th Infantry Division approaches from the east, while the 26th Infantry Division arrives from the south. Staff planning allocated separate time windows for each division. But the 80th moved faster than expected, while the 26th encountered delays that put them behind schedule. The result? Thousands of vehicles from two divisions trying to use the same road junction at the same time. Traffic backs up for miles in both directions. Units intermix, creating organizational chaos. Company commanders lose contact with battalion headquarters. Supply trucks get separated from the units they support. Muller receives reports of the jam at 0200 hours and personally drives to Longwy, arriving at 0400 to find complete gridlock. What Muller does next receives little attention in popular histories, but exemplifies the kind of improvisational problem-solving that makes military operations work. He commandeers every military police officer within 20 miles, concentrating them at the Longwy junction. He orders all vehicles stopped while he physically walks through the jam, identifying unit designations and reorganizing the movement. 80th Division vehicles get directed onto a secondary road that parallels the main highway, accepting the slower movement speed to separate the two flows. 26th Division vehicles remain on the primary route, but must maintain 50-yard spacings to prevent further bunching. Muller stands at the junction for 4 hours, personally directing traffic with a flashlight, shouting orders that grow increasingly profane as exhaustion and frustration mount. By 0800 hours, traffic flows again. The cost: a 4-hour delay that compresses an already tight timeline. The technological challenges of moving armor in winter conditions surprise many units. Tank engines require preheating before starting in temperatures below 20 degrees. Crews build small fires under engine compartments, a dangerous procedure that risks fuel fires but proves necessary to prevent mechanical damage. Track assemblies freeze if tanks sit motionless for more than an hour, requiring crews to manually break ice from the tracks before movement. Diesel fuel, used in tank destroyers and some trucks, gels at low temperatures, clogging fuel lines and filters. And maintenance crews add gasoline to diesel tanks, a risky improvisation that reduces engine life but prevents gelling. Batteries lose power rapidly in cold, leaving crews with limited attempts to start engines before batteries die completely. These aren't dramatic combat challenges, just the grinding technical problems that accompany mechanized warfare in winter. By December 22nd, lead elements of 3 divisions reach their jump-off positions near Arlon and Luxembourg. The 4th Armored Division, Third Army's elite unit, has traveled approximately 75 miles in 60 hours. The 80th Infantry Division covered 80 miles in similar time. The 26th Infantry Division managed 65 miles despite the Longwy delay. By any conventional standard, this movement qualifies as a logistical achievement. But the cost becomes apparent when commanders inspect their units. Soldiers arrive exhausted, having slept perhaps 8 hours total during the movement. Vehicle breakdown rates reach 18%. Nearly 1 in 5 vehicles either disabled or requiring immediate maintenance. Supply trucks carrying ammunition and fuel lag hours behind combat units. Soldiers lack winter clothing beyond their standard uniforms, leaving them dangerously exposed to temperatures forecast to drop below 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Artillery units set up guns but have no time to register them on target areas, meaning initial fire missions will rely on map coordinates rather than observed accuracy. Patton tours forward positions on the afternoon of December 21st, evaluating whether units can attack as scheduled. What he observes would give most commanders pause. Men shiver in summer-weight uniforms. Tanks arrive with frozen weapon systems requiring hours of maintenance. Infantry companies report 30% of their strength suffering cold-related injuries ranging from frostbite to hypothermia. Supply officers warn that units carry ammunition for perhaps 48 hours of combat, after which they'll require resupply through roads still clogged with traffic. Intelligence remains fragmentary. Third Army doesn't know which German units hold positions ahead, where enemy strength concentrates, or what reserves might counterattack. By every reasonable measure, the attack should be delayed until conditions improve. Patton orders the attack to proceed as scheduled for 600 hours, December 22nd. His reasoning combines strategic calculation and psychological understanding. Strategically, Bastogne can't hold much longer. The surrounded garrison's ammunition and supplies approach exhaustion. Every hour of delay increases the probability Bastogne falls before relief arrives. Psychologically, Patton grasps that his force's greatest advantage lies in shock. The Germans don't expect a major counteroffensive this quickly. American forces possess momentum from their rapid movement north, a psychological energy that will dissipate if units sit waiting for perfect conditions. War rewards aggression and punishes hesitation, Patton believes, and this moment demands aggression despite imperfect preparation. Whether this decision reflects military genius or reckless gambling becomes clear only in retrospect. Through outcomes no one can predict as darkness falls on December 21st, and soldiers try to sleep in frozen vehicles before the morning attack. December 19th, 1944, late afternoon, Lieutenant Colonel Julian Ewell, commanding the 5th 01st Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division, stands on a hilltop outside Bastogne, Belgium, staring at a landscape that makes no tactical sense. His regiment arrived 6 hours earlier, rushed from reserve positions near Reims, with orders to defend this town against German attack. But defend against what? From which direction? Intelligence reports place German forces north, east, south, and west of Bastogne, essentially surrounding the town except for a narrow corridor to the southwest. Every Ewell watches that corridor, even as trucks bringing the last elements of the 101st Airborne stream through it, and he knows what those trucks represent. The last supply convoy that will reach Bastogne for the foreseeable future. When those trucks leave, the corridor closes, and the garrison becomes surrounded. Bastogne itself possesses no particular tactical value beyond its road network. 7 highways converge in this Belgian market town of approximately 4,000 civilians, making it a transportation hub but not a fortress. No significant defensive fortifications exist. The surrounding terrain offers gently rolling hills, providing observation but little cover. A few scattered forests might conceal troops, but the open farmland between forests favors attackers with armor. Pre-war Bastogne served as a regional center for cattle markets and lumber trade. Now, its stone buildings and narrow streets shelter American soldiers who arrived expecting to reinforce a defensive position, and instead find themselves improvising a defense with almost no preparation time. The 101st Airborne, approximately 11,800 men when fully assembled, represents the town's entire garrison. They have the ammunition they carried, the supplies their trucks brought, and nothing else. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, acting division commander of the 101st, establishes his command post in the Heinz Barracks on Bastogne's northern edge. His situation on December 19th combines confusion with incomplete information, and radio reports describe German forces bypassing Bastogne to the north and south, apparently more interested in reaching the Meuse River than reducing this surrounded garrison. But some German units definitely approach Bastogne itself, reconnaissance elements, perhaps advance guards of larger formations. McAuliffe doesn't know if he faces a full siege, a brief encirclement, or something in between. He does know that Bastogne's survival depends on Third Army reaching the town before the garrison's supplies exhaust. The question no one can answer: how long can they hold? The first German attack hits Bastogne's eastern perimeter on December 20th at 0400 hours. Elements of the 26th Volksgrenadier Division probe American positions near the village of Nefe, testing the defensive strength. And American paratroopers repel the attack with small arms and machine gun fire, but the engagement reveals disturbing intelligence. The Germans attacking Bastogne aren't the exhausted remnants of broken units, but relatively fresh formations executing a deliberate siege. Over the next 48 hours, German forces tighten the ring around Bastogne, cutting the southwest corridor and completing the encirclement. By December 22nd, Bastogne exists as an island of American resistance within German-controlled territory, supplied only by occasional airdrops that depend on weather clearing long enough for aircraft to reach the town. The psychological impact of encirclement affects different soldiers differently. Some paratroopers view it as validation of their elite status, surrounded, outnumbered, yet confident in their ability to hold. Others experience the claustrophobic anxiety of being cut off from support, knowing wounds can't be evacuated, that ammunition once expended can't be replaced, that relief depends on forces they can't contact or observe. The civilian population trapped inside Bastogne adds another dimension of stress. Approximately 3,000 Belgian civilians shelter in basements during the bombardment, consuming food the garrison needs, occupying space required for military purposes, creating moral obligations that complicate military decisions. McAuliffe can't order civilians to leave. Where would they go through German lines? But their presence reminds American soldiers that this fight involves protecting innocents, not just holding terrain. December 22nd brings the famous surrender demand. 8 German officers approach American lines under white flag, carrying a typewritten document addressed to the American commander of the encircled town of Bastogne. The message, courteous but firm, points out the hopelessness of the American position and offers honorable surrender to avoid total annihilation of the garrison and town. McAuliffe's one-word response, "nuts," becomes legendary, though its delivery involves more complexity than popular mythology suggests. When his staff brings the surrender demand, McAuliffe initially doesn't understand what response to send. Colonel Harry Kinnard suggests they send McAuliffe's initial verbal reaction, "nuts." The German officers receiving this response initially don't understand the American slang, requiring translation that it means, "go to hell." This brief exchange, in lasting perhaps 20 minutes, achieves strategic significance by demonstrating American resolve and buying time for Patton's relief force. The reality of Bastogne's defense involves less dramatic heroism than grinding endurance. Soldiers occupy frozen foxholes for days without relief, unable to build fires that would reveal positions. Artillery crews ration ammunition to 10 rounds per gun daily, firing only at confirmed targets rather than the preparatory barrages typical of American operations. Medical personnel treat casualties in cellars without adequate supplies, performing surgery by flashlight, rationing morphine and bandages. The cold proves as dangerous as combat. Frostbite casualties exceed battle wounds during the first days of siege. Men rotate through warm positions every few hours, like spending 15 minutes in a cellar to restore circulation before returning to frozen foxholes. Food runs short. The garrison slaughters cattle found in nearby farms, distributing fresh meat that soldiers cook over small fires during darkness when smoke can't be observed. Belgian civilians trapped in Bastogne experience the siege from perspectives American soldiers rarely witness. Renée Lemaire, a 29-year-old nurse, volunteers to assist American medics treating wounded in the basement of the Saar department store. She works 18-hour shifts, helping overwhelmed medical personnel cope with casualties that quickly exceed available bed space. Wounded soldiers lie on the floor, on tables, anywhere space exists. The basement stinks of blood, disinfectant, and unwashed bodies. Lemaire speaks limited English but communicates through gestures and shared medical knowledge. On December 24th, a German artillery shell hits the building, collapsing part of the basement. Lemaire dies in the rubble, along with several wounded Americans she was treating. Her death, like hundreds of others in Bastogne, receives no immediate recognition, just a note in a casualty list that no one outside the town can receive because radio communications focus on military necessity rather than individual tragedy. By December 23rd, Bastogne's situation approaches critical. ammunition stocks drop to levels that permit perhaps one more significant engagement before shortages force selective rationing. Food supplies allow half rations for approximately 4 more days. Medical supplies approach exhaustion, morphine, plasma, Alice bandages all critically low. Fuel for vehicles exists in quantities sufficient for perhaps 24 hours of operations. The weather remains overcast, preventing aerial resupply and the air support that might suppress German artillery. McAuliffe maintains confident radio communications with higher headquarters, reporting that Bastogne can hold indefinitely, but his private conversations with staff officers reveal deeper concerns. If Third Army doesn't arrive within 48 hours, Bastogne faces a choice between surrender and annihilation. The garrison's morale remains surprisingly high. Paratroopers trust their training and leadership, but trust doesn't replenish ammunition or create food from nothing. The strategic absurdity of Bastogne becomes apparent when examining German dispositions. Multiple panzer divisions bypass the town, racing west toward the Meuse River, rather than stopping to reduce this surrounded garrison. From a purely operational perspective, the Germans should ignore Bastogne, leaving minimum forces to contain it, while concentrating maximum strength on the breakthrough toward Antwerp. But Hitler personally orders Bastogne captured, viewing the town's resistance as an affront requiring response. This decision diverts German forces from their main objective, creating the operational space that allows Patton's counteroffensive to achieve strategic impact. Bastogne matters not because of its tactical value, but because both sides invest it with psychological significance neither can abandon. The Americans must relieve Bastogne to demonstrate they don't abandon surrounded forces. You see, the Germans must capture Bastogne to prove their offensive retains momentum. Both sides make a mid-sized Belgian market town the symbolic center of the entire Ardennes campaign, and this shared delusion shapes the battle in ways pure military logic cannot explain. December 22nd, 1944, 0600 hours. Captain James Leach, commanding Company C, 37th Tank Battalion, 4th Armored Division, watches his lead Sherman tank roll forward into fog so thick he can barely see 30 yards ahead. His company, 14 tanks when at full strength, currently 13 after mechanical breakdowns during the movement north, attacks toward the village of Warnash, Belgium, supposedly lightly defended by German rear area troops. Leach's orders are simple: advance rapidly toward Bastogne, 25 miles north, brushing aside minor resistance. Intelligence briefings describe German forces in his sector as negligible. The fog should lift by mid-morning, providing clear observation. The attack should cover 12 miles today, reaching the outskirts of Bastogne by nightfall. Everything in Leach's briefing suggests this will be more movement than combat. Everything in Leach's briefing is wrong. At 0623 hours, Leach's lead tank, a Sherman commanded by Sergeant Robert Hare, hits an anti-tank mine on the road 1 mile south of Warnash. The explosion tears off the Sherman's right track and damages the suspension. Hare's crew evacuates the disabled vehicle, and Leach orders the second tank to push the wreck aside to clear the road. Before this happens, German anti-tank guns, hidden in the fog, open fire. The distinctive crack of high-velocity guns echoes through the mist. A 75mm round hits Leach's third tank, penetrating the turret and killing 2 crewmen instantly. Another round misses, passing so close to Leach's own tank that he feels the pressure wave. Within 90 seconds, what should have been a rapid advance becomes a desperate firefight in zero visibility conditions, where German guns can see American tanks, but American tanks can't locate German positions. The reality confronting 4th Armored Division contradicts every intelligence estimate provided at higher headquarters. Instead of encountering demoralized rear area troops, American forces hit elements of the 5th Fallschirmjäger Division, approximately 9,000 veteran German paratroopers, backed by remnants of the Führer Grenadier Brigade. These units occupy prepared defensive positions that American intelligence never identified because reconnaissance couldn't penetrate German lines before the attack began. The rushed timeline that got Third Army north in 72 hours left no time for the normal preliminary operations that precede major attacks. Patrol actions to identify enemy positions, artillery registration on likely defensive areas, aerial reconnaissance photography to map enemy dispositions. 4th Armored Division attacks essentially blind, discovering German strength through the lethal process of running into it. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, commanding the 37th Tank Battalion, receives Leach's contact report and immediately grasps the situation's gravity. His battalion planned to advance 12 miles today. Instead, they've covered barely 1 mile and already lost 3 tanks. Abrams orders his other companies to probe different routes, seeking weak points in the German defenses. Over the next 6 hours, every probe encounters similar resistance, prepared positions, anti-tank guns, infantry well supplied with Panzerfaust rockets. The fog that should have lifted by mid-morning persists through the afternoon, negating American advantages in artillery observation and air support. By 1500 hours on December 22nd, 4th Armored Division's Combat Command, B, the force tasked with the main attack toward Bastogne, holds positions 4 miles from its starting point, having suffered 29 tanks destroyed or disabled and over 400 casualties. The human cost of attacking without proper reconnaissance emerges in casualty reports that flood back to aid stations. Tank crews burned when their vehicles catch fire after being penetrated by anti-tank rounds. Infantry wounded by machine gun fire as they assault German positions identified only moments before contact. Soldiers with severe frostbite who couldn't feel their feet freezing during hours in frozen foxholes. Medical personnel quickly exhaust supplies of morphine and plasma. Ambulances struggle to evacuate wounded through roads still clogged with supply traffic. Some wounded wait 8 hours or more for medical attention, lying in frozen ditches while medics deal with more critical cases. The impersonal statistics, 29 tanks and 400 casualties, represent specific individuals. Sergeant Hoyer with shrapnel wounds to his legs, Lieutenant Wilson with third-degree burns covering 40% of his body, Private Rodriguez who loses 3 toes to frostbite and never returns to combat. German defenders experience their own version of December 22nd's chaos. Lieutenant Klaus Gerke, commanding a Fallschirmjäger company near Warnach, watches American tanks approach through fog with a mixture of fear and confusion. His intelligence briefings suggested Third Army remained engaged on the Saar front, incapable of rapid redeployment. Yet here they come, less than a week after the Ardennes offensive began, attacking in division strength. Gerke's company, approximately 130 men when the offensive started, and currently about 90 after 6 days of combat, occupies foxholes they dug 3 days earlier when retreating American forces abandoned the position. They have adequate ammunition but limited anti-tank weapons, 2 75mm guns, a handful of Panzerfaust rockets, and the hope that fog will conceal them long enough to engage tanks at close range. When American armor appears, Gerke's men fight with the desperation of soldiers who understand they face overwhelming force that will eventually crush them if they can't delay it sufficiently. The technological failures that plague both sides on December 22nd illustrate winter warfare's special challenges. Old American tank guns experience firing malfunctions at an 18% rate, nearly 1 in 5 weapons failing to fire properly due to frozen firing mechanisms or lubricants that solidified in sub-zero temperatures. Tank crews attempt field expedients, heating gun breeches with small fires, cycling weapons repeatedly to generate friction warmth, adding lighter oils to frozen mechanisms. Some of these improvisations work, others cause additional malfunctions that leave tanks effectively disarmed in combat. German weapons suffer similar problems. Gerke reports that nearly a quarter of his company's rifles won't fire reliably, forcing soldiers to work actions manually after each shot. One anti-tank gun's recoil mechanism freezes solid after the first shot, rendering the weapon inoperable until crews can warm it for 30 minutes. Nightfall on December 22nd finds 4th Armored Division holding positions far short of their objectives, having discovered that the attack toward Bastogne will be neither quick nor cheap. Commanders huddle in frozen command posts, studying maps by flashlight, trying to formulate plans for the next day's operations, with intelligence that remains fragmentary and unreliable. They know German forces hold strong positions ahead. They don't know the exact strength, the precise locations, or what reserves might counterattack. Radio communications with Bastogne remain intermittent, providing only fragmentary information about the garrison's status. Higher headquarters demands progress reports showing movement toward objectives, but the report's officers' file honestly describe fighting that yields minimal territorial gain at maximum cost. Soldiers attempting to sleep on the night of December 22nd face conditions that make rest nearly impossible. Temperatures drop to -5 degrees Fahrenheit. Men huddle in foxholes, sharing body warmth, rotating positions so everyone gets time in the slightly warmer center of the group. Vehicles sit with engines running to prevent fuel from gelling and batteries from dying, but the noise prevents sleep, and the visible exhaust creates targets for German artillery. Some units risk small fires for warmth, accepting the danger of revealing positions, because the alternative, freezing to death, seems more immediate than the possibility of German attack. Tank crews sleep in their vehicles when possible, using the residual engine heat. But even this provides minimal comfort when external temperatures approach -10 degrees, and metal surfaces suck heat from anything they contact. The first day of Third Army's offensive toward Bastogne ends with a sobering realization. This will not be the rapid exploitation Patton envisioned at Verdun. The distance from Ardennes to Bastogne, approximately 25 miles on the map, translates to days or even weeks of combat against determined German resistance in the worst weather conditions American forces have experienced in this war. Every mile will require fighting. Every village will need clearing. The relief of Bastogne, if it happens at all, will cost far more than anyone predicted when staff officers sketched movement arrows on maps in warm headquarters rooms. This is the reality of winter warfare in the Ardennes. And December 22nd is only the beginning. December 23rd, 1944, 0400 hours. Staff Sergeant Michael Kowalski, Ordnance Section, 4th Armored Division, walks among parked tanks performing pre-dawn maintenance checks before the day's operations begin. He carries a flashlight, though using it risks revealing positions to German observers. His breath forms ice crystals that catch moonlight. The temperature gauge on his watch reads -8 degrees Fahrenheit. Kowalski's assignment: ensure tank engines will start when crews need them. What he discovers makes that assignment impossible. In vehicle after vehicle, he finds diesel fuel transformed into thick gel that won't flow through fuel lines. Engine oil has solidified to consistency approaching wax. That batteries that tested fully charged yesterday evening now barely register voltage. An entire battalion's worth of armor, 35 tanks, sits immobilized not by German action, but by temperature. The phenomenon Kowalski encounters repeats across Third Army positions throughout the Ardennes. The diesel fuel issued to American forces originates from supplies formulated for moderate temperatures, lacking additives that prevent gelling in extreme cold. Army regulations specify that diesel fuel should include anti-gelling agents when temperatures drop below 20 degrees, but the sudden redeployment north left supply officers no time to swap fuel stocks. Units that loaded diesel in France, expecting temperatures in the 20s or 30s, now operate in conditions 20 to 30 degrees colder. The result: fuel systems throughout Third Army experience simultaneous failures as temperatures plunge below zero. Tank destroyers, using diesel engines, prove particularly vulnerable. Entire battalions wake to find their vehicles unable to start, leaving them defenseless against German armor they were specifically equipped to defeat. Ordnance crews develop improvised solutions that verge on desperation. Some try heating fuel tanks with portable heaters, but this risks fires in fuel-saturated environments. Others add gasoline to diesel tanks, a dangerous mixture that reduces engine life and risks explosions, but lowers the fuel's gelling temperature enough to maintain flow. The most common solution involves building small fires under engine compartments to warm oil pans and fuel lines sufficiently for engines to turn over. That's soldiers scavenge wood from destroyed buildings, collect branches from forests, even burn furniture taken from abandoned homes. They build these fires in darkness, shielding the flames with tarpaulins and their own bodies, knowing the light and smoke reveal their positions, but accepting the risk because immobilized tanks serve no purpose. Technical Sergeant James Morrison, Maintenance Section, 80th Infantry Division, spends December 23rd morning addressing a different cold weather crisis: weapons that won't fire. He receives reports from rifle companies describing M1 Garand rifles that jam after a single shot, Browning automatic rifles that fire one round, then lock up, carbines whose actions freeze solid. Morrison traces the problem to lubricants. Standard military weapons oil contains additives that improve performance in warm weather, but turn thick and sticky in extreme cold. When soldiers fire weapons, the heat of combustion temporarily liquefies these lubricants, but they quickly re-solidify, creating friction that prevents actions from cycling properly. Morrison's solution, passed through division channels, instructs soldiers to completely strip lubricant from all weapons, leaving metal surfaces dry or coated with only the lightest possible oil film. This creates long-term wear problems, but solves the immediate crisis of weapons that won't function in combat. The medical consequences of extreme cold overwhelm aid stations across Third Army. Captain Robert Zimmerman, battalion surgeon with the 328th Infantry Regiment, treats his 37th frostbite case before 0800 hours on December 23rd. His aid station, established in a partially destroyed barn, receives a steady stream of soldiers with blackened toes, fingers swollen beyond recognition, faces showing the waxy discoloration that indicates deep tissue damage. Zimmerman knows the treatment protocols: gradual rewarming in water between 95 and 100 degrees Fahrenheit, pain management with morphine if available, evacuation to hospitals for cases requiring amputation. But he lacks the resources to treat properly. Water must be heated over small fires, which takes time and fuel in short supply. Morphine stocks ran low days ago, forcing medical personnel to ration it for the most severe cases. Evacuation depends on ambulances that struggle through snow-choked roads, often taking hours to reach rear area hospitals. The ratio of cold weather casualties to battle casualties reveals winter's impact. During the first 72 hours of Third Army's offensive, medical units record approximately 4,900 battle casualties, soldiers wounded by enemy fire, artillery fragments, or other combat-related causes. During the same period, they document over 7,000 cold weather casualties, frostbite, hypothermia, trench foot, and related conditions. Put simply, winter injures more American soldiers than the Germans do. This creates a crisis within a crisis. Every man evacuated for frostbite represents a permanent loss to unit strength. Unlike battle wounds, where some percentage of injured soldiers return to duty after treatment, severe frostbite typically ends a soldier's combat service. Any toes and fingers, once frozen and damaged, rarely heal sufficiently for frontline duty. Units bleed strength not through combat attrition, but through simple exposure to conditions the human body cannot endure indefinitely. The technological superiority American forces typically enjoy evaporates in -10-degree temperatures. Radios fail as batteries die within minutes of exposure to cold. Tank periscopes fog with condensation that freezes, blinding crews. Artillery pieces experience recoil mechanism failures, rendering guns inoperable until crews can warm mechanisms with blowtorches, assuming blowtorches work in such cold. Ammunition behaves unpredictably. High explosive shells become brittle in extreme temperatures, increasing dud rates. Some rounds detonate prematurely when the shock of firing interacts with cold-stressed explosives. Propellant charges burn less efficiently, reducing range and accuracy. These aren't dramatic failures that prevent all operations, just degrading factors that accumulate, reducing effectiveness by 10% here, 15% there, until American forces find themselves fighting at perhaps 60% of their theoretical capability. German forces face similar cold weather challenges, but demonstrate better preparation. Wehrmacht units in the Ardennes carry winter clothing issued before the offensive began. Greatcoats with wool linings, fur-lined caps with ear flaps, insulated gloves that permit weapons handling. German vehicles use fuel formulated for winter conditions. German weapons, particularly the Sturmgewehr 44 assault rifle, prove more reliable in cold than American designs. This isn't German superiority in engineering, but rather the advantage of defending prepared positions in familiar territory versus attacking across unfamiliar ground with equipment optimized for different conditions. American soldiers notice these disparities and feel them acutely. Why do the Germans have winter coats while we shiver in summer uniforms? Why do their weapons work while ours jam? The answers involve logistics timelines, supply priorities, and strategic decisions made months earlier. But those explanations provide little comfort to men freezing in foxholes. December 24th, Christmas Eve, brings no relief from cold, but does bring the first significant snowfall since Third Army entered the Ardennes. Heavy, wet snow falls throughout the day, accumulating to 14 inches by nightfall. This snow creates new problems layered atop existing ones. Roads become impassable to wheeled vehicles. Supply trucks carrying ammunition and food to forward positions get stuck miles from their destinations. Infantry advancing cross-country find movement exhausting, wading through snow that reaches mid-thigh in open fields. Tank crews discover that snow packed in road wheels and track assemblies freezes solid, requiring hours of chipping ice before vehicles can move. The snow also obscures mines and booby traps, increasing casualties from soldiers who step on explosives buried beneath white blankets. Yet the snow provides some advantages. It muffles sound, allowing American patrols to approach German positions with less risk of detection. It reveals movement, making German counterattacks visible from greater distances. And most significantly, it forces both sides to slow operations, creating brief respites from combat's intensity. Units use these pauses for maintenance, equipment repair, medical treatment, and the minimal rest possible in such conditions. Soldiers scrape snow aside to dig deeper foxholes, using the excavated snow to build protective parapets. They pack snow around their positions for added insulation. Some discover that 2 feet of packed snow provides protection against small arms fire and shell fragments, though it offers no defense against direct artillery hits. The psychological toll of fighting in such conditions manifests in ways commanders struggle to address. Soldiers grow irritable, fighting among themselves over minor grievances. Discipline problems increase, men refusing orders, abandoning positions, or feigning illness to escape frontline duty. Medical officers report rising rates of combat exhaustion, that indefinable breaking point where soldiers simply stop functioning as effective fighters despite showing no physical wounds. Company commanders face impossible choices. Court-martial men for failing to do what may be humanly impossible, or tolerate behavior that in any other circumstance would constitute cowardice. Most choose a middle path, quietly rotating the most affected soldiers to rear positions when possible, accepting that extended exposure to winter combat conditions breaks even strong men. As darkness falls on December 24th, temperatures drop to minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit with wind chill. This represents the coldest conditions Third Army will experience during the entire Ardennes campaign. His soldiers huddle in whatever shelter exists, knowing that sleeping outdoors in such cold risk death. Tank crews crowd inside their vehicles, engines running continuously to provide minimal heat that barely keeps temperatures above freezing inside cramped crew compartments. Infantry dig snow caves where possible, using body heat and shared blankets to create microenvironments just warm enough to prevent fatal hypothermia. No one celebrates Christmas Eve. They endure it, and survival itself becomes achievement enough. December 24th, 1944. 1400 hours. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams stands in the turret of his Sherman tank, studying the village of Chaumont through binoculars. The village sits 3 miles south of Bastogne, 8 stone buildings clustered along a narrow road that represents 4th Armored Division's best route to the surrounded garrison. Intelligence reports suggest light German resistance, perhaps a company of infantry, maybe some anti-tank guns. Abrams knows better than to trust intelligence after 2 days of discovering every estimate wrong. His 37th Tank Battalion has lost 19 tanks since December 22nd, advancing barely 8 miles. Every village conceals German defenders. Every road junction harbors anti-tank guns. The 4 remaining miles to Bastogne might as well be 40. The attack into Chaumont begins at 14:30 hours with artillery preparation. 12 guns firing for 10 minutes, expending precious ammunition that supply trucks struggle to replace. Then Abrams' lead tanks roll forward, engines growling, each treads churning snow. The village appears deserted, no movement in windows, no defenders visible in the streets. This absence of activity makes experienced tankers nervous. Empty villages usually mean ambushes. At 14:45, the lead Sherman enters Chaumont's main street. Nothing happens. The tank advances 50 yards. Still nothing. Then, from a building barely visible through falling snow, a Panzerfaust rocket streaks toward the Sherman. The rocket-propelled grenade hits the tank's side armor, penetrating and igniting ammunition stored inside. The Sherman explodes, turret lifting off the hull, crashing down 30 feet away. The crew never escapes. What follows is close-quarters urban combat of the worst kind. German infantry occupy every building, firing from windows, doorways, cellars. Any American tanks can't elevate their guns sufficiently to engage second-floor positions. Infantry advancing to support the armor gets pinned by machine gun fire from multiple directions. Abrams orders tanks to systematically destroy buildings, firing high-explosive shells into structures until they collapse. But this creates rubble that blocks the street, requiring engineers to clear paths under fire. The fight for Chaumont consumes 6 hours, costs 11 tanks, and over 200 infantry casualties, and yields control of a village whose pre-war population numbered fewer than 300 people. By 2000 hours, American forces hold Chaumont, but they're exhausted, low on ammunition, and still 3 miles from Bastogne. Lieutenant Charles Boggess, commanding a platoon of 5 Shermans in the 37th Tank Battalion, receives orders that evening to conduct a reconnaissance toward Bastogne. Intelligence suggests the corridor between Chaumont and Bastogne might be lightly held. The Germans concentrated their strength in villages rather than in open country. Boggess's mission: advance cautiously, identify German positions, determine if a larger force can push through to Bastogne. He departs Chaumont at 0500 hours on December 25th, Christmas morning, moving through darkness with blackout lights, his tanks spaced 50 yards apart. The route crosses farmland, frozen fields, offering little cover, but also few obstacles. Boggess expects contact any moment. Contact doesn't come. By 0800 hours, Boggess reaches high ground, 4 miles south of Bastogne. Through morning twilight, he observes the town itself. There's church steeples visible against gray sky. He also observes something unexpected: American positions, foxholes, defensive wire, soldiers in American uniforms. Boggess keys his radio, transmitting what becomes one of the war's most famous messages: "Come on in, this is friendly." The response from Bastogne's perimeter comes immediately: "We've been waiting for you." At 1645 hours on December 26th, 4.5 days after Third Army attacked north, Boggess's tanks break through to the 101st Airborne's defensive perimeter, establishing first contact between Third Army and Bastogne's garrison. The relief of Bastogne that Boggess achieves is less dramatic than later mythology suggests. His 5 tanks establish contact, yes, but they don't open a secure corridor. The route Boggess traveled remains under German observation and fire. Behind him, other 4th Armored Division elements fight desperate battles to widen the penetration into something resembling a usable supply line. By nightfall on December 26th, the corridor to Bastogne measures approximately 250 yards wide at its narrowest point, barely room for 2 vehicles to pass. German forces hold positions on both sides, close enough to engage traffic with small arms fire. Artillery shells bracket the road at regular intervals. The relieving force itself requires relief. The first supply convoy attempts the corridor run on December 27th. 40 trucks loaded with ammunition, medical supplies, and food depart from Assenois at 0600 hours, following the route Boggess's tanks pioneered. The convoy commander, Captain William Dwight, receives simple instructions: drive fast, don't stop for anything, accept losses as inevitable. The trucks roll in single file, maintaining 50-yard spacing. drivers white-knuckled on steering wheels as German machine guns open a fire from both flanks. Shells impact the road ahead and behind. One truck takes a direct hit, exploding in the flames that force following vehicles to swerve around the wreckage. Another truck's driver is killed by sniper fire. The assistant driver pushes the body aside and continues driving. Of 40 trucks that enter the corridor, 31 reach Bastogne. 9 are destroyed, their cargoes lost, their crews dead or captured. Major William Desabris, commanding a tank battalion in Bastogne's garrison, that watches the supply trucks arrive with emotions he'll struggle to articulate in later interviews. Relief, certainly. The supplies will keep Bastogne fighting, but also apprehension. The corridor remains so narrow, so vulnerable, that it feels less like rescue than a lifeline that might snap at any moment. German artillery targets the corridor continuously. Infantry probes test its flanks. Desabris understands military logistics well enough to calculate that this 250-yard corridor cannot sustain Bastogne's requirements. The garrison needs hundreds of tons of supplies daily. The corridor can deliver perhaps 100 tons under ideal conditions, which these are not. Bastogne remains effectively besieged, now with a supply line as fragile as spider silk stretched across a chasm. Yes, the human cost of establishing this corridor emerges in casualty reports that horrify even hardened commanders. 4th Armored Division, from December 22nd through December 27th, suffers 1,140 casualties, killed, wounded, or missing. This represents approximately 15% of the division's strength lost in 5 days. Tank losses reach 57 vehicles destroyed or damaged beyond field repair. Company-level leadership suffers disproportionately. Platoon leaders, commanding from exposed turret positions where they can observe and direct their tanks, die at rates approaching 30%. Some companies cycle through 3 different commanders in 4 days. Sergeants lead platoons. Corporals command tanks. Replacements arrive and die before learning their squad mates' names. The German forces attacking the corridor experience their own nightmare of attrition. Oberst Heinz Kokot, commanding the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, orders repeated attacks to cut the American supply line. His division, which numbered approximately 12,000 men when the Ardennes offensive began, now fields perhaps 8,000 effective soldiers after 2 weeks of combat. Every attack into the corridor costs casualties Kokot cannot replace. American artillery, finally receiving adequate ammunition through the open supply line, delivers devastating defensive fires. Tank destroyers positioned on the corridor's flanks engage German armor at ranges where American guns penetrate but German rounds cannot. By December 28th, Kokot's after-action reports describe his division as exhausted, critically undermanned, and incapable of sustained offensive operations. Yet the attacks continue. Hitler personally orders Bastogne captured, viewing the town's continued resistance as unacceptable. German forces mount 26 separate actions against the corridor between December 26th and December 31st. Some attacks achieve temporary success, cutting the road for hours until American counterattacks restore contact. One assault on December 28th reaches within 100 yards of the corridor's center, close enough that German soldiers can see American supply trucks rolling past. American engineers and infantry counterattack, driving the Germans back in hand-to-hand fighting that leaves bodies stacked in frozen ditches. The corridor holds, yes, but barely, and at cost, that makes commanders question whether maintaining it justifies the casualties. This question, whether Bastogne's relief justifies its price, becomes the subject of heated discussions at Third Army headquarters. Patton argues that abandoning Bastogne after fighting so hard to reach it would devastate American morale and embolden German defenders. Bradley counters that resources devoted to widening the corridor might achieve more strategic gain if redirected toward closing the entire German salient. Eisenhower, caught between competing strategic priorities, ultimately decides that Bastogne must be held and supplied, whatever the cost. This decision commits Third Army to weeks of additional combat in the Ardennes. It's transforming what began as a relief operation into a sustained campaign of attrition that will consume American divisions through January. On the night of December the 31st, engineers string communications wire along the corridor, establishing reliable telephone connections between Bastogne and Third Army headquarters for the first time since the siege began. McAuliffe speaks with Patton directly, describing Bastogne's situation in terms that make clear the garrison's survival remains uncertain, despite relief. German forces still surround 3/4 of the defensive perimeter. Artillery shells fall on the town continuously. Supply shortages persist despite the corridor. Medical supplies particularly critical, with morphine stocks nearly exhausted and plasma in short supply. Patton promises additional relief efforts. Wider corridors, more supplies. McAuliffe thanks him and returns to his command post, where the sounds of German artillery remind him that promises mean nothing compared to the reality of shells exploding in frozen streets. December the 22nd, 1944. 0600 hours. Colonel William Sands, commanding the 328th Infantry Regiment, 80th Infantry Division, stands at his jump-off line near Merzig, Luxembourg, watching his lead companies advance into darkness toward German positions at Edelbruck. His regiment received orders identical to 4th Armored Division: attack north toward Bastogne, brush aside resistance, advance rapidly. But Sands commands infantry, not tanks, and infantry moves differently. Where armor can bypass strong points, infantry must reduce them. Where tanks accept calculated risks, infantry pays for risks in blood. Sands knows his regiment will fight a different battle than the 4th Armored fights. Slower, harder, less celebrated. The terrain confronting 80th Infantry Division offers none of the advantages tank country provides. Dense forests, steep hills, narrow valleys that channel movement into predictable kill zones. German defenders occupy high ground, forcing American infantry to attack uphill through waist-deep snow. Every tree line conceals machine gun positions. Every farmhouse holds snipers. The division's 3 regiments, 317th, 318th, and 319th Infantry, advance on parallel axes, each encountering German resistance measured not in companies but in battalions. Intelligence estimates suggesting light resistance prove as wrong for infantry as they did for armor. The 80th Infantry Division attacks into elements of 4 separate German divisions, all veterans, all determined to hold ground. Lieutenant James Hendricks, leading a rifle platoon in Wolfeny B, 319th Infantry, experiences the reality of winter infantry combat in its most brutal form on December 23rd. His platoon, 41 men when they jumped off, attacks a German-held village called Hayderscheid. The approach crosses 800 yards of open ground with no cover except occasional trees. German machine guns open fire at 400 yards, tracers streaking through falling snow. Men fall. Others dive for whatever cover exists. Hendricks crawls forward, rallying survivors, and organizing by hand signals because shouting reveals positions. They reach the village outskirts after 2 hours, having covered 800 yards at cost of 11 casualties. Then comes house-to-house fighting, clearing buildings one at a time with grenades and rifle fire. By nightfall, Hendricks' platoon holds half of Hayderscheid. His strength, 19 men. The casualty rates infantry sustains stagger even experienced medical personnel. Captain Sarah Mitchell, battalion surgeon with the 317th Infantry, treats over 300 wounded during the first 72 hours of the offensive. Her aid station, established in a half-destroyed church, receives casualties faster than she can process them. Litter bearers carry wounded through snow, sometimes taking hours to traverse distances measured in hundreds of yards. Men arrive with tourniquets applied hours earlier, tissue damage worsening from delayed treatment. Others come with multiple wounds, leg injuries from mines, torso wounds from machine gun fire, facial trauma from artillery fragments. Mitchell performs triage ruthlessly. Immediate treatment for those who might survive, with quick intervention, morphine and chaplain services for those too badly wounded to save. Delayed treatment for walking wounded who can wait. The 80th Infantry Division's advance yields measured progress purchased in blood. December 22nd. 2 miles gained, 430 casualties. December 23rd. 3 miles gained, 590 casualties. December 24th. 1 mile gained, German resistance stiffens. 380 casualties. Each day's statistics represent specific tragedies. Private First Class Robert Chen, 20 years old, killed by artillery on December 23rd, body not recovered until December 28th. Sergeant Michael O'Brien, squad leader, loses both legs to mine on December 24th, dies during evacuation. Lieutenant Paul Davidson, company commander, shot by snipers December 22nd, paralyzed from waist down, evacuated to England, then United States, never walks again. These names appear in casualty reports as numbers, but each number represents a human being whose life ends or changes permanently in frozen Belgian forests. 26th Infantry Division, attacking from Ardennes toward Bastogne's southern perimeter, fights through similar nightmare terrain against similar determined resistance. Major General Willard Paul, commanding the division, watches his forces grind forward at rates averaging less than a mile daily. His 328th Infantry Regiment captures the village of Rambruch on December 24th after 18 hours of continuous combat. The 337th Infantry takes Grobhaus on December 26th, a town of fewer than 200 pre-war inhabitants, after 2 days of fighting that costs over 300 American casualties and leaves the village essentially destroyed. 90% of buildings damaged or demolished. The public narrative of Bastogne's relief focuses almost exclusively on 4th Armored Division's breakthrough, creating historical amnesia about Infantry Division's contributions. Yet examining the operational maps reveals that 4th Armored's narrow corridor could never have been established or maintained without 26th and 80th Infantry Divisions attacking on the flanks, preventing German forces from concentrating against the armor penetration. While Abrams tanks grabbed headlines, infantry regiments fought equally desperate battles that attracted no reporters, generated no dramatic photographs, earned no glory. They fought anyway, because orders demanded it, and professionalism compelled it, and abandoning surrounded comrades was unthinkable, regardless of cost. Technical Sergeant David Wilson, Heavy Weapons Platoon Leader, 328th Infantry, describes the distinction between infantry and armor operations in terms that illuminate why history remembers one but forgets the other. Tanks could shoot and move. We had to shoot and stay, then crawl forward, then shoot and stay again. Every 100 yards took hours. Reporters wanted to follow the tanks because tanks move fast enough to make good stories. Nobody wanted to spend 6 hours watching us take a single farm building. This observation, recorded in Wilson's post-war memoir, captures the essential difference. Armor operations, however costly, provided the rapid movement and dramatic breakthroughs that translated to compelling narratives. Infantry combat, equally costly and arguably more difficult, consisted of slow accumulation of small gains that didn't photograph well or reduce to simple headlines. December 27th brings both infantry divisions into contact with Bastogne's perimeter from different directions. 26th Infantry Division's 104th Regiment reaches the southern defensive positions, hours after Bogus's tanks make first contact. 80th Infantry Division's 3. 19th Infantry approaches from the southeast, linking up with Bastogne's defenders on December 28th. These additional connections to the surrounded garrison widen the corridor, providing alternative supply routes that reduce pressure on the single road 4th Armored opened. Yet these achievements receive minimal recognition. The narrative solidifies. Patton's armor relieved Bastogne. The infantry divisions become footnotes, their casualties statistical background to the main story. And the psychological impact of fighting the forgotten battle manifests differently across individual soldiers. Some express bitter resentment that their sacrifices go unrecognized while tankers receive credit for the entire operation. Private First Class Anthony Russo, 328th Infantry, writes to his family on December 29th, "We fought just as hard, lost just as many friends, but when we get home, nobody will know we were here. They'll remember the tanks. They always remember the tanks." Others display professional resignation, accepting that infantry work rarely attracts glory. Sergeant Major Thomas Kelly, veteran of North Africa and Sicily campaigns, tells his company, "We don't do this for medals or newspaper stories. We do it because somebody has to. And we're the ones who can." Both responses reflect truth about military service, the tension between desire for recognition and commitment to duty, regardless of recognition. The combined casualties of 26th and 80th Infantry Divisions during their operations toward Bastogne exceed 4th Armored Division's losses. 26th Infantry, 2,409 killed, wounded, or missing between December 22nd and December 31st. 80th Infantry, 2,144 casualties same period. Together, these two divisions suffer 4,553 casualties compared to 4th Armored's 1,140. Put differently, its infantry divisions fighting in direct support of the armored breakthrough suffer 4 times the casualties, while receiving perhaps 1/10 the historical attention. This disparity reflects not the relative importance of their contributions, but rather the narrative convenience of simple stories over complex ones. On January 1st, 1945, as Third Army consolidates positions around Bastogne, commanders from all 3 divisions meet at McAuliffe's headquarters to coordinate future operations. Abrams represents 4th Armored Division. Colonel Richard Seeley speaks for 80th Infantry Division. Brigadier General Thomas Sherburne represents 26th Infantry Division. The meeting, intended to address tactical coordination, becomes instead a moment of mutual recognition. Abrams acknowledges that his tanks could never have reached Bastogne without infantry protecting his flanks. Seeley points out that infantry couldn't have penetrated as deeply without armor drawing German attention. Sherburne observes that all 3 divisions suffered, all 3 contributed, all 3 deserve credit. This private acknowledgement among professional soldiers represents perhaps the only recognition the infantry divisions receive for their role in Bastogne's relief, recognition from those who understand the reality behind the myth. December 25th, 1944, 0001 hours. Precisely at midnight, German artillery opens fire across Third Army positions throughout the Ardennes. The bombardment isn't tactical, not directed at specific targets or coordinated with ground attacks. It's symbolic. In a Christmas greeting delivered in high explosive and shrapnel, American soldiers crouching in frozen foxholes recognize the timing immediately. Shells scream overhead at 1 minute past midnight. Explosions blossom in snow-covered fields. The war pauses for nothing, not even the day Christians worldwide celebrate as the birth of peace. The message from German gunners is explicit. There will be no Christmas truce, no moment of shared humanity across enemy lines, only continuous combat through holidays that now mean nothing except another day to survive. Chaplain James O'Neill, Third Army's chief chaplain, conducts Christmas Mass at 0800 hours in a frozen field near Chaumont for Company K, 328th Infantry Regiment. 300 men attend, standing in snow because sitting means soaking uniforms that won't dry for days. O'Neill wears his vestments over a field jacket, his breath visible as he recites familiar prayers. The soldiers hold their rifles, unable to set weapons aside even during religious services because German positions sit barely a mile away. O'Neill delivers a homily about hope in darkness, faith during trial, the promise of eventual peace. His words vanish into cold air, swallowed by wind and the distant rumble of artillery. When he concludes with benediction, soldiers disperse immediately. Lingering in groups creates targets. The entire service lasts 23 minutes. Field kitchens attempt to serve Christmas dinner, that small tradition meant to remind soldiers of home, of normalcy, of a world beyond war. Cooks prepare turkey shipped from the United States, cranberry sauce from cans, dehydrated potatoes reconstituted with boiled water. They heat the food in field kitchens positioned as close to front lines as safety permits, then load it into insulated containers for distribution. But temperatures around 0 degrees Fahrenheit defeat even insulated containers. Food freezes during transport. The turkey arrives at company positions as chunks of ice. Potatoes solidify into inedible paste. Soldiers attempt to eat anyway, heating frozen turkey over small fires, chipping at cranberry sauce with bayonets. Some succeed in consuming a few bites of relatively warm food. Others abandon the effort and return to cold rations, canned hash, crackers, chocolate bars. Private Martin Rodriguez later writes, "They tried to give us Christmas dinner, Man, it froze before we could eat it. Everything freezes here. Food, water, hope. The casualties continue through Christmas Day with indifference to the calendar. 80th Infantry Division suffers 163 wounded and 47 killed. 4th Armored Division loses 29 men killed in action. 26th Infantry Division records 91 wounded, 22 killed. German casualties facing Third Army reach estimated 670 killed, over 2,000 wounded, based on prisoner reports and interrogations. These numbers, clinical and precise, represent men who woke Christmas morning and never reached December 26th. Families back home, American families in Iowa and New York and California, and German families in Bavaria and Prussia and Saxony, celebrate Christmas unaware that their sons and husbands died that day, bodies lying in snow or rush through overwhelmed aid stations. Medics work through Christmas Day with the same intensity as any other day because wounds don't recognize holidays. Captain Zimmerman, battalion surgeon with 328th Infantry, treats 87 casualties on December 25th. Some result from combat wounds, artillery fragments, bullet impacts, grenade explosions. Others stem from cold, severe frostbite requiring evacuation, hypothermia needing immediate rewarming, trench foot cases where tissue damage has progressed to infection. Zimmerman performs 2 amputations on Christmas Day, toes frozen beyond recovery for one soldier, fingers destroyed by shrapnel for another. The surgery happens in a barn with minimal anesthesia, flashlights providing illumination. The patient screams muffled with morphine that barely touches the pain. Zimmerman finishes the second amputation at 1700 hours, washes blood from his hands with snow because water is frozen, and moves to the next patient. The Christmas prisoner exchange that sometimes occurs in war, temporary truces to recover wounded, evacuate casualties, exchange dead for burial, doesn't happen in the Ardennes on December 25, 1944. Both sides maintain combat operations continuously. No white flags appear. No negotiations for temporary ceasefires occur. Bodies lie where they fall, freezing solid within hours, creating grotesque monuments to the day's fighting. American graves registration units cannot operate in forward areas under fire, leaving bodies to be recovered days or weeks later. German forces face similar problems. The frozen corpses accumulate, and winter preserves them with such fidelity that when recovery teams eventually reach these positions in January, the bodies appear almost alive, faces still showing final expressions, eyes sometimes open, as though death occurred minutes rather than weeks earlier. A curious incident unfolds in the 101st Airborne Sector in Bastogne during late afternoon. A wounded German soldier, separated from his unit during the fighting, crawls to American lines singing "Stille Nacht," Silent Night. The soldier, barely conscious from blood loss, doesn't realize he's approaching enemy positions. An American medic, Corporal James Freeman, and he hears the singing and investigates, finding the German bleeding from stomach wounds that will prove fatal. Freeman carries the man to an aid station, where doctors attempt treatment while the German continues singing, voice weakening with blood loss. He dies at 1900 hours, still humming the hymn. Freeman later reflects that he didn't know the soldier's name, unit, or hometown, only that he died on Christmas Day singing about peace. Letters written on Christmas Day reveal the psychological landscape soldiers inhabit. Lieutenant William Carlson, 4th Armored Division, writes to his wife, "Today is Christmas, but it doesn't feel like Christmas. It feels like any other day here, cold, dangerous, endless. I try to remember Christmases at home, but those memories seem like they belong to a different person, in a different life. This is my life now. Frozen foxholes and explosions and men dying. I don't know when or if I'll experience normal Christmas again." Private Robert Mitchell, 26th Infantry Division, writes his parents, "You asked what I want for Christmas. I want to be warm, that's all. Just warm for 1 hour. That's the Christmas gift I dream about." These letters, representative of thousands written that day, express not despair, but rather a profound exhaustion, a weariness that extends beyond physical fatigue into something spiritual. The contrast between Christmas at home and Christmas in the Ardennes creates cognitive dissonance for soldiers who receive mail that day. Letters from families describe Christmas trees, presents, children opening gifts, Christmas dinner with relatives. These descriptions, they've meant to cheer soldiers by connecting them to home, instead deepen the separation. How to reconcile images of warm houses and happy families with the reality of frozen corpses and artillery fire. Some soldiers read these letters and weep, the emotional release providing catharsis. Others stop reading mail from home, unable to bridge the psychological gap between what they endure and what their families imagine. Staff Sergeant Daniel O'Connor throws away an unopened letter from his mother, later explaining, "I couldn't read about Christmas at home. It would make me crazy thinking about where I am versus where they are." General Patton observes Christmas in character, visiting forward positions, speaking to soldiers, projecting confidence and aggression. At one stop, he encounters a group of soldiers gathered for impromptu prayer service. As Patton removes his helmet, bows his head, and prays with them. The prayer he offers, later recorded by observers, asks not for peace or safety, but for fair weather for battle and strength to destroy our enemies. This prayer, consistent with Patton's personal theology that views war as righteous violence against evil, strikes some soldiers as appropriate and others as disturbing. Private Thomas Henderson later recalls, "The general prayed for good killing weather on Christmas Day. I wasn't sure if that was faith or something else entirely." The ambiguity reflects deeper questions about how religious faith intersects with military violence, questions that become particularly acute on days meant to celebrate peace. As darkness falls on December 25th, temperatures plunge to minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit, the coldest night of the campaign. Soldiers huddle in whatever shelter exists, knowing sleep in such cold risks death. Tank crews keep engines running continuously, burning scarce fuel to maintain enough heat to prevent freezing. Infantry share body warmth in crowded foxholes, rotating positions to ensure everyone gets time in the warmer center. Some units build small fires, accepting the tactical risk because the alternative, freezing to death, seems more immediate than German attack. Guard duty becomes particularly dangerous. Soldiers assigned to stand watch in such cold risk hypothermia within an hour. Units rotate guards every 30 minutes, the absolute maximum time anyone can safely remain exposed and relatively immobile. Christmas 1944 ends not with joy or celebration, but with simple survival. And soldiers count it a successful Christmas if they remain alive, relatively warm and still capable of fighting tomorrow. The day nobody celebrated becomes instead the day everyone endured, another 24 hours survived in a campaign that seems to have no end. The holiday's only gift is the gift soldiers give each other: continued resistance, maintained positions, unwillingness to surrender despite conditions that would justify surrender. They fight on Christmas Day not because orders demand it, though orders do demand it, but because abandoning the fight means abandoning each other. And that remains unthinkable even when everything else has become nightmare. December 22nd, 1944, 1600 hours. General der Panzertruppen, Hasse von Manteuffel, commanding 5th Panzer Army, and stands in his command post near St. Vith, Belgium, studying reports that make no sense. His intelligence officers describe strong American forces approaching from the south, Third Army elements apparently disengaging from the Saar and moving north. But this should be impossible. Manteufel's pre-offensive intelligence assessments indicated Third Army fully committed to operations against Germany's western border, incapable of rapid redeployment. Yet, intercepted American radio traffic mentions 4th Armored Division, 80th Infantry Division, 26th Infantry Division, all Third Army units, all heading toward his southern flank. Either American forces possess logistics capabilities German planners never imagined, or Patton predicted this offensive and prepared for it. Neither explanation comforts Manteuffel. The entire German operation, codenamed Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine, rests on assumptions now proving incorrect. Hitler's plan envisions German forces breaking through American positions in the Ardennes, crossing the Meuse River by December 25th, reaching Antwerp by mid-January, splitting Allied forces and compelling a negotiated peace in the West. The timeline depends on speed, surprise, and Allied forces requiring weeks to organize coherent response. But Third Army attacks on December 22nd, barely 6 days after the offensive began. This rapid response threatens to disrupt German timetables before panzer divisions reach even preliminary objectives. Manteuffel, a professional soldier who harbored private doubts about Hitler's plan from the beginning, now confronts evidence that his doubts were justified. And Oberst Heinz Kokott, commanding 26th Volksgrenadier Division, south of Bastogne, experiences Patton's attack as existential threat. His division executed its assigned mission: bypass Bastogne, push west toward the Meuse, maintain momentum. But now, American forces attack from the south in division strength, threatening to cut Kokott's supply lines and isolate his forces. He requests permission to withdraw units from the Bastogne encirclement to defend against Third Army. 5th Panzer Army denies the request. Hitler's personal order demands Bastogne captured before continuing the advance. Kokott finds himself caught between contradictory imperatives: maintain the Bastogne siege while defending against Third Army's relief offensive. His division, already depleted by 6 days of combat, cannot accomplish both missions simultaneously. The German reserve situation grows increasingly desperate as Third Army applies pressure. Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, German Armed Forces High Command, originally allocated substantial reserves for exploitation after the initial breakthrough. Panzerlehr Division, 9th Panzer Division, Führer Grenadier Brigade. These units were supposed to pass through the breakthrough and drive toward Antwerp, not defend against American counteroffensives from the south. But on December 24th, OKW directs 3 divisions originally designated as exploitation forces to move south and contain Third Army. This decision, made reluctantly by commanders who recognize it undermines the offensive's strategic purpose, reflects Hitler's refusal to acknowledge that the operation is failing. Reserves intended to exploit success, instead, get consumed defending against American counterattacks. General Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein, commanding Panzerlehr Division, receives orders on December 26th to move south and attack the Corridor 4th Armored Division open to Bastogne. Bayerlein, one of Germany's most experienced armor commanders, recognizes this mission as near suicidal. His division has been in continuous combat since December 16th. Strength, approximately 60 tanks, remaining from an original allocation of 110. Personnel, roughly 8,000 men, down from 12,000. Ammunition, critically low because supply lines can't keep pace with consumption. Fuel, sufficient for perhaps 40 kilometers of operations before tanks run dry. Not yet orders demand he attack prepared American positions defended by armor, artillery, and air support. Bayerlein prepares his division for the attack while privately writing in his diary, "This is the beginning of the end." The attack Bayerlein launches on December 27th against the Bastogne corridor achieves initial penetration, but collapses within hours. American artillery, coordinated by forward observers with excellent sight lines, delivers devastating defensive fires. P-47 Thunderbolts, flying their first missions after weather cleared, strafe German tank columns with rockets and machine gun fire. Bayerlein's Panthers and Mark IVs, superior to American Shermans in armor and firepower under normal circumstances, find those advantages negated by American numerical superiority and air dominance. By nightfall, December 27th, Panzerlehr Division withdraws, having lost 19 tanks and over 400 men. The corridor remains open. Bayerlein's diary entry that evening reads simply, "We can no longer win this war." German soldiers fighting against Third Army experience the offensive's failure through accumulating defeats and deteriorating conditions. Gefreiter Hans Richter, infantry soldier with 5th Fallschirmjäger Division, describes December 28th in his post-war memoir, "We attacked the Americans expecting the quick victories our officers promised. Instead, we found prepared positions, overwhelming artillery, and defenders who fought with determination we did not anticipate. By the 4th day, our company strength had fallen from 130 men to 70. We had no replacements. And every day we grew weaker, while the Americans seemed to grow stronger." This observation, common across German accounts, reflects the war's fundamental mathematics. Germany cannot replace losses while Allied forces can. The fuel crisis that plagued German planning from the offensive's conception reaches catastrophic levels by late December. The operation depended on capturing American fuel dumps during the initial breakthrough, but most dumps were destroyed or evacuated before German forces reached them. Panzer divisions, consuming fuel at rates exceeding planners' estimates due to winter conditions and difficult terrain, begin running dry. On December 29th, 9th Panzer Division reports 30% of its tanks immobilized due to fuel exhaustion. 2nd Panzer Division, which reached positions within miles of the Meuse River, the offensive's deepest penetration, sits motionless, out of fuel, exposed to American counterattacks. It lacks mobility to escape. The images German newsreels showed in December, powerful panzer columns crushing American resistance, transform by month's end into reality of disabled tanks abandoned when fuel trucks cannot reach them. Hitler's response to reports of the offensive stalling reveals his increasing detachment from military reality. When Manteuffel requests permission to withdraw from exposed positions and consolidate defensive lines, Hitler refuses. When field commanders explain that continuing offensive operations will destroy their divisions through attrition, Hitler orders them to attack harder. On December 31st, during a conference at Führer headquarters, Hitler insists the offensive can still succeed if commanders execute orders with sufficient will. Generals who privately recognize the operation has failed find themselves unable to speak truth to a dictator who interprets accurate reporting as defeatism. The German command system, which previously balanced Hitler's strategic vision with professional military advice, now consists only of Hitler's demands and commanders' futile attempts to achieve impossible objectives. The psychological impact on German soldiers of shifting from offensive to defensive operations manifests in rising desertion rates and declining combat effectiveness. Units that attacked with confidence on December 16th now defend positions with growing awareness that defeat approaches. Lieutenant Klaus Gerke, whose company fought at Warnach, it describes his soldiers' changing attitudes in letters intercepted by American intelligence. The men fought bravely when we believed we could win. Now they fight because orders demand it, but their hearts are no longer in the battle. They see American tanks, American artillery, American aircraft, and they know we cannot match these numbers indefinitely. We fight on, but we no longer believe. This erosion of faith in victory, spreading across German forces throughout the Ardennes, transforms the Wehrmacht from a confident offensive force into an army fighting for survival. By January 1st, 1945, the strategic situation has reversed completely from Hitler's vision. German forces hold a salient extending 60 miles into Allied lines, but lack the strength to push further. American forces, recovering from initial shock, compress the salient from north and south. The Bastogne garrison, reinforced and resupplied, ties down German divisions that should be advancing toward Antwerp. Third Army's offensive from the south threatens to cut off German spearheads that penetrated too deeply. Manteuffel, surveying casualty reports and supply status, calculates that the offensive has cost approximately 30,000 German casualties, over 600 tanks destroyed or disabled, and strategic reserves that Germany can never replace. The outcome he predicted privately before the offensive becomes undeniable reality. Wacht am Rhein has failed, and its failure guarantees Germany's eventual defeat. December 28, 1944, 0600 hours. Captain Raymond Morrison, commanding Company A, 35th Engineer Combat Battalion, and surveys the road between Ardennes and Bastogne with professional dread. His company received orders that sound simple: clear mines from the corridor, widen the road, improve the supply route to Bastogne. The reality confronting Morrison makes those orders nearly impossible. The corridor, still under German observation and fire, is littered with disabled vehicles, shell craters, and an unknown number of mines German engineers planted during the brief period they controlled this ground. Morrison's tools, mine detectors, bayonets for probing, hands for digging. His protection, minimal. Engineers clearing mines must work slowly, methodically, in positions exposed to enemy fire. Speed and caution exist in opposition, yet Morrison needs both. The mine-clearing operation begins with reconnaissance teams using portable detectors, electronic devices that emit tones when metal is present. The detectors work adequately in dry conditions but struggle in snow and frozen ground. Electrical resistance changes with temperature, creating false positives that waste time and false negatives that risk lives. Engineers compensate by probing with bayonets, carefully inserting blades into ground at angles meant to avoid pressure plates that detonate mines. This method, painfully slow, identifies mines the detectors miss but exposes engineers to sustained periods in exposed positions. Morrison watches his soldiers work and calculates that, at their current pace, clearing the entire corridor will require weeks. Third Army needs it cleared in days. Private First Class Joseph Kowalski, they say engineer with Company A, discovers the corridor's mine density the hard way on December 28th afternoon. His detector indicates metal presence. He begins probing, inserting his bayonet carefully into frozen ground. The blade hits resistance, possibly a mine, possibly a rock. Kowalski probes around the obstruction, trying to determine its shape. His bayonet contacts something that yields slightly. He freezes. That yielding sensation suggests pressure plate. He carefully withdraws the bayonet and begins excavating around the suspected mine with his hands, scraping frozen soil away, grain by grain. After 20 minutes, he exposes a Teller mine, a German anti-tank mine containing 11 pounds of high explosive, sufficient to destroy a tank or obliterate anyone nearby when it detonates. And Kowalski marks the mine's location and moves to the next detector signal. Behind him, ordnance disposal teams will defuse or destroy the mine. In Kowalski's section of road, approximately 200 yards, engineers eventually identify 47 mines. The German artillery targeting engineers working in the corridor demonstrates tactical sophistication that surprises American commanders. Rather than firing random harassment, German guns target specific sections of road where engineer activity concentrates. Forward observers, watching from high ground on both sides of the corridor, direct fire onto engineer teams the moment work begins. American counter-battery fire attempts to suppress these observers, but German positions in stone buildings and wooded areas prove difficult to destroy. Yet the result, engineers work under intermittent but accurate artillery fire that makes already dangerous work potentially suicidal. Morrison loses 3 men killed and 7 wounded on December 28th alone. Unacceptable casualties for work that has barely started. Tank destroyer crews positioned along the corridor's flanks provide critical defensive support that receives little recognition. Lieutenant Michael Barnes, commanding a platoon of 4 M10 tank destroyers, establishes positions on high ground, overlooking the corridor from the west. His mission: engage any German armor attempting to cut the supply line. From December 28th through January 5th, Barnes's platoon engages German tanks and assault guns 37 separate times, small probes testing the corridor's defenses, the larger attacks attempting to sever it completely. The M10 Wolverine tank destroyer, mounting a powerful 76mm gun on a lightly armored chassis, excels in this defensive role. Barnes's crews achieve kills at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards, distances where German return fire proves less accurate. By January 5th, Barnes's platoon alone claims 19 German armored vehicles destroyed, at cost of 2 M10s knocked out and 5 crewmen killed. The expansion of the corridor proceeds through brutal incremental progress. December 29th, corridor widens to approximately 800 yards at the narrowest point. December 30, 1,200 yards. January 1st, 1 mile. January 5th, nearly 2 miles. Each day's expansion costs casualties, expends ammunition, consumes engineer resources. But each day's expansion also improves Bastogne's situation. Supply convoys that previously ran the corridor under direct fire now traverse routes with some standoff distance from German positions. Medical evacuation becomes more reliable. Reinforcement units can enter Bastogne without facing the gauntlet that characterized the initial relief. The tonnage delivered to Bastogne through the corridor illustrates its growing effectiveness. December 27th, 120 tons of supplies. December 30, 350 tons. January 5th, 800 tons. This supply flow, while still below Bastogne's ideal requirements, suffices to maintain defensive operations and even accumulate small reserves. The garrison's ammunition situation improves from critical to adequate. Its food stocks allow full rations rather than emergency half rations. Medical supplies reach levels permitting proper treatment of wounded rather than battlefield triage. The psychological impact of reliable supply proves as significant as the material benefits. Soldiers fight better, knowing ammunition and medical support won't run out. Yet the corridor remains vulnerable to German counterattacks throughout early January. On January 2nd, elements of the 1st SS Panzer Division attack from the north, attempting to cut the corridor near its midpoint. The attack, supported by over 40 tanks and assault guns, achieves initial penetration that forces temporary corridor closure. American forces counterattack with elements of the 6th Armored Division, recently arrived to reinforce Third Army. The resulting engagement consumes 14 hours. It results in 23 American tanks and 17 German tanks destroyed, and leaves the corridor intact but damaged. Traffic resumes after engineers clear wrecked vehicles, but the close call reminds commanders that Bastogne's relief remains incomplete as long as German forces maintain positions on both flanks. The engineering achievement the corridor represents becomes clearer when examining what Morrison's company accomplishes by January 5th. His engineers clear 4,800 mines from approximately 6 miles of road and adjacent terrain. They fill 127 shell craters, rendering the road passable to heavy vehicles. They construct 14 bypasses around destroyed bridges and impassable road sections. They string communications wire, providing reliable telephone connections. Yes, they establish traffic control points, managing vehicle flow to prevent jams. This work, performed under fire and in sub-zero temperatures, receives minimal recognition because it lacks the dramatic quality of combat actions. Yet, without it, the corridor doesn't function. And without the corridor, Bastogne cannot be sustained. The human cost of widening the corridor appears in casualty statistics that shock even commanders familiar with infantry losses. 35th Engineer Combat Battalion suffers 340 casualties, killed, wounded, or missing, during corridor operations between December 28th and January 10th. This represents approximately 40% of the battalion's strength, a loss rate comparable to rifle companies in sustained combat. In other engineer battalions working the corridor experience similar casualties. Tank destroyer battalions defending the flanks lose over 200 men. Infantry securing positions adjacent to the corridor suffer hundreds more. The cumulative cost of transforming a narrow penetration into a secure supply line reaches thousands of casualties, rivaling the initial relief operation's human price. On January 10th, Eisenhower visits Bastogne via the corridor, the Supreme Commander's first visit since the siege began. His journey through the corridor takes 90 minutes to traverse the 12 miles from Ardennes to Bastogne, a route that should require perhaps 20 minutes under peacetime conditions. The slow pace reflects both traffic congestion and continued German artillery harassment. Eisenhower observes wrecked vehicles pushed aside to clear the road, shell craters filled with rubble, engineers working to maintain the supply line. In Bastogne, McAuliffe briefs him on the garrison's situation, emphasizing that while the relief succeeded, the town remains in a salient surrounded on 3 sides by German forces. Eisenhower authorizes additional divisions to expand Third Army's operations, recognizing that Bastogne's relief represents only partial success. True resolution requires eliminating the entire German salient. December 23, 1944. 0900 hours. Major Robert Johnson, commanding the 61st Fighter Squadron, 56th Fighter Group, sits in the cockpit of his P-47 Thunderbolt on a forward airfield near Luxembourg. Night watching weather that has grounded his squadron for a week finally begin to clear, broken clouds at 3,000 feet. Visibility, 5 miles and improving. Wind, 15 knots from the northwest. These aren't ideal flying conditions, but they're sufficient. After 7 days of watching Third Army fight without air support, Johnson and his pilots are desperate to contribute. The mission briefing was simple. Armed reconnaissance south of Bastogne. Attack any German vehicles or concentrations. disrupt enemy operations, support ground forces however possible. Johnson starts his engine, signals his wingman, and begins rolling toward the runway. The P-47 Thunderbolt, Republic Aviation's contribution to Allied air dominance, represents perhaps the most capable ground attack aircraft of the European war. Its .850 caliber machine guns provide devastating firepower against soft targets. Hard points under the wings carry bombs or rockets for engaging armor. The massive radial engine and rugged construction allow the aircraft to absorb battle damage and return home. Most significantly, the P-47's range, approximately 500 miles with external fuel tanks, permits it to operate across the entire Ardennes battlefield. As Johnson climbs through clearing weather, he commands 16 aircraft armed with machine guns, rockets, and 500-pound bombs. His orders grant considerable initiative. Find targets, destroy them, repeat until fuel or ammunition exhausts. At 1000 hours, Johnson's formation crosses the front lines south of Bastogne. Below, the landscape reveals itself as target-rich environment. German supply columns crowd roads, attempting to move ammunition and fuel to forward positions before American aircraft arrive. Johnson identifies a convoy, approximately 30 trucks, some towing artillery pieces, moving west toward combat zones. He radios attack instructions to his formation and rolls into his first strafing run. The Thunderbolt's nose drops toward the target. Johnson lines up the lead truck in his gun sight, squeezes the trigger. 8 machine guns fire simultaneously, tracers arcing toward the convoy. The lead truck explodes as incendiary rounds ignite fuel or ammunition. Johnson pulls up, watching his wingman's attack destroy 2 more vehicles. The convoy scatters, trucks attempting to reach tree cover, but Thunderbolts follow them, firing rockets and dropping bombs. Within 10 minutes, the convoy ceases to exist. Burning vehicles block the road. Survivors flee into forests. Secondary explosions suggest ammunition trucks detonating. The psychological impact on German ground forces of suddenly facing Allied air attack after a week's respite approaches terror. Gefreiter Otto Schmidt, driving a supply truck in the convoy Johnson's formation destroys, describes the experience in post-war testimony. "We heard the aircraft engines and knew we were dead. There was nowhere to hide on that road. I watched the fighters diving, saw the tracers coming toward us like lines of fire, felt the truck next to mine explode. I jumped out and ran. The Americans kept shooting at us even after we abandoned the vehicles. They wanted to kill everything on that road." Schmidt survives by hiding in a drainage ditch while Thunderbolts make multiple passes. When he emerges, every truck in his convoy is destroyed or burning. He walks 20 kilometers back to his unit, reaching them 3 days later. Forward air controllers, American officers positioned with ground units to direct airstrikes, transform air support from random harassment to precision application. Lieutenant William Carpenter, serving as FAC with the 37th Tank Battalion, communicates directly with aircraft overhead via radio, describing targets and directing strikes. On December 24th, Carpenter identifies German tanks forming for counterattack against the Bastogne corridor. He radios coordinates to orbiting Thunderbolts. Hayes then marks the target with white phosphorus shells fired from nearby artillery. The P-47s roll in on the marked position, firing rockets that destroy or disable 6 German tanks in the first pass. Carpenter observes impacts, adjusts fire, and calls in second pass that destroys 3 more tanks. The German counterattack, broken before it begins, dissolves as surviving armor retreats. This coordination between ground and air forces multiplies effectiveness exponentially. The statistics documenting Allied air operations between December 23rd and December 31st illustrate the air campaign's scale. Total sorties flown: over 12,000 fighters, bombers, and reconnaissance aircraft operating across the Ardennes battlefield. P-47 Thunderbolts account for approximately 7,500 sorties, focusing primarily on ground attack. P-38 Lightnings fly 2,000 sorties, mixing ground attack with air superiority missions. British Typhoons contribute 500 sorties, attacking German positions in First Army sectors north of the Bulge. The tonnage of ordnance delivered: approximately 3,000 tons of bombs, 15,000 rockets, over 8 million rounds of machine gun ammunition. This aerial onslaught, concentrated in 8 days after weather cleared, devastates German logistics and mobility. German casualties from air attack during this period remain difficult to calculate precisely, but captured documents and prisoner interrogations suggest massive losses. Vehicles destroyed or damaged, estimated 820, including approximately 130 tanks and assault guns. Gas personnel casualties, roughly 3,000 killed or wounded directly from air attack, with thousands more suffering psychological trauma from constant threat of aerial assault. Infrastructure damage, bridges destroyed, road networks interdicted, supply dumps burned. The cumulative effect exceeds the direct casualties, creating an environment where German forces can move only at night or in weather too poor for flying, drastically reducing operational tempo. The Luftwaffe's response to Allied air dominance proves inadequate and increasingly desperate. German fighters attempt to contest Allied air superiority, but face overwhelming numerical disadvantage. On December 24th, Luftwaffe fighters engage American formations in 17 separate dogfights over the Ardennes. The results: 41 German aircraft shot down, then 11 American aircraft lost. This nearly 4-to-1 loss ratio reflects both superior American aircraft and superior American pilot training. Experienced Luftwaffe pilots, those who survived 4 years of war, are increasingly scarce. Replacement pilots receive minimal training, often fewer than 100 flight hours before entering combat, and die quickly when engaging veterans flying better aircraft. By December 27th, Luftwaffe sorties over the Ardennes dropped to fewer than 50 daily, compared to over 1,500 Allied sorties. The morale impact on Third Army ground forces of finally receiving air support manifests in numerous accounts. Soldiers who spent a week fighting without air cover, watching German forces move freely, suddenly observe enemy convoys destroyed from above, German positions strafed, and enemy movements interdicted. Private Eugene Luciano, 4th Armored Division, describes watching P-47s attack German positions during the December 26th push toward Bastogne. We'd been fighting alone, just us against them, and it felt like we were losing. Then the weather cleared and the planes came. Suddenly we weren't alone anymore. The Germans couldn't move without getting shot from above. It changed everything. We knew we'd win. This psychological shift from desperate defense to confident offense reflects air power's impact beyond simple metrics of vehicles destroyed. The technical challenges of close air support in winter conditions require constant adaptation. Low clouds frequently force aircraft to operate at altitudes where anti-aircraft fire proves effective. German forces, anticipating air attacks when weather permits, concentrate anti-aircraft weapons near likely target areas. Flak, anti-aircraft artillery, shoots down 37 American aircraft between December 23rd and December 31st. Pilots develop tactics to minimize exposure, high-speed approaches, single-pass attacks rather than multiple orbits, immediate egress after weapons release. These tactics reduce accuracy but improve survival. Johnson, whose squadron loses 4 aircraft to flak during this period, accepts the trade-off. Better to destroy 70% of a target and survive than destroy 100% and get shot down. Weather remains the ultimate arbiter of air operations even after the initial clearing. January 1st brings renewed overcast, grounding most aircraft. January 2nd allows limited operations. Best January 3rd. Clear skies permit maximum effort. This pattern, alternate days of flying weather and grounding conditions, continues through early January, creating operational rhythm, where ground forces push forward when air support is available and consolidate when weather grounds aircraft. Commanders learn to time attacks to weather forecasts, recognizing that assaulting prepared positions without air support risks excessive casualties while attacking under clear skies multiplies effectiveness. The long-term impact of the air campaign extends beyond immediate tactical results. German forces, traumatized by constant aerial attack, develop defensive behaviors that reduce their offensive capability. Units refuse to move during daylight, limiting operational flexibility. Supply convoys travel only at night, reducing throughput. And command posts relocate to underground bunkers, degrading communications. Senior officers become reluctant to visit forward positions, fearing aerial attack during travel. This psychological impact, as significant as physical destruction, transforms the Wehrmacht from an army capable of offensive operations into forces focused primarily on survival. The air war, resuming after a week's weather-imposed pause, doesn't just support Third Army's operations. It fundamentally alters the battlefield environment, making German defeat inevitable even before ground combat reaches conclusion. January 3, 1945. First Army Headquarters, Verviers, Belgium. Lieutenant General Courtney Hodges studies maps showing the German salient from the north, while Third Army attacks from the south. The obvious solution? Coordinated pincer movement. Ace with First Army attacking south from Houffalize, while Third Army drives north, meeting somewhere in the middle and trapping German forces in the collapsing Bulge. Bradley and Eisenhower endorse this strategy. Patton agrees, though he privately lobbies for Third Army to receive the primary role. The challenge? Coordinating two armies that haven't operated together closely, across terrain that favors defenders, against German forces fighting to avoid encirclement. The target date for link-up, January 16th. The location, Houffalize, a small Belgian town whose name few Allied soldiers can pronounce, but which becomes the symbolic objective of the campaign's final phase. Third Army's advance toward Houffalize begins January 3rd, with attacks by multiple divisions. The 11th Armored Division, it recently arrived in theater and seeing its first major combat, spearheads the drive from the south. The division's commander, Brigadier General Charles Kilburn, moves his forces through terrain that challenges even experienced units. Rolling hills, dense forests, road networks damaged by 3 weeks of combat. German defenders occupy prepared positions, forcing the 11th Armored to fight for every village, every crossroads, every kilometer. The division's inexperience shows in early engagements, tanks advancing without adequate infantry support, artillery fire poorly coordinated, communications breaking down under pressure. Kilburn learns through brutal experience, his division suffering over 800 casualties in the first 4 days while advancing barely 6 miles. If the weather during early January transforms the battlefield yet again, temperatures rise slightly, hovering around 20 degrees Fahrenheit, still well below freezing, but warm enough to partially melt accumulated snow. The melt creates new problems. Roads turn to mud, slowing vehicle movement. Fields become quagmires where tanks bog down. The frozen ground that prevented foxhole digging, but provided solid footing for maneuver, transforms into slush that exhausts soldiers and vehicles alike. Engineers struggle to maintain road surfaces, spreading gravel and rubble to create traction. But supply lines can't deliver materials fast enough. Divisions that previously measured progress in miles per day now measure in hundreds of yards per day through terrain that seems designed to prevent movement. Though First Army's attack south from Houffalize encounters similar difficulties, the 84th Infantry Division, attacking from Marchy, fights through the same kind of prepared German defenses Third Army faces from the opposite direction. The 2nd Armored Division, attempting to exploit infantry gains, finds that exploitation in Ardennes winter conditions means grinding forward against continuous resistance. By January 8th, First Army formations advancing south have covered approximately 12 miles in 5 days. Progress measured more by casualties sustained than ground gained. The armies converge, but slowly, far slower than staff planning predicted. German forces trapped in the shrinking salient face existential choices. Senior commanders request permission to withdraw, while withdrawal corridors remain open. Hitler refuses, and ordering forces to hold present positions regardless of encirclement risk. General Lieutenant Heinrich von Lüttwitz, commanding 47th Panzer Corps, receives these orders and understands they condemn his command to destruction. His diary entry from January 10th reads, "The Führer orders us to stand fast. To stand fast here means to die here. We stand fast anyway because disobedience would mean execution and would not save our men." This fatalistic acceptance characterizes German command decisions throughout the salient's collapse. Officers executing orders they know are suicidal because the alternative offers no better outcome. The civilian population trapped in Houffalize experiences the converging offensives as extended nightmare. The town's pre-war population of approximately 2,700 has swelled with refugees from surrounding villages, then declined as those with means to evacuate flee westward ahead of American advances. By January 10th, perhaps 300 civilians remain, sheltering in cellars while artillery from both north and south impacts the town. Anna Toussaint, Belgian schoolteacher, keeps a diary throughout the siege. Her January 12th entry describes, "The shelling never stops. American shells from the south, American shells from the north, sometimes German shells. We cannot tell the difference except all of them kill. The house above our cellar collapsed yesterday. We dug our way out. Where do we go? Every direction brings us toward different armies, all of them destroying our town. January 16th, 09:16 hours. Now patrols from 3rd Army's 41st Armored Infantry Regiment and 1st Army's 84th Infantry Division meet in Houffalize's ruins. The town, once a picturesque market center with stone buildings and cobblestone streets, no longer exists as a functioning community. 3 weeks of combat reduced it to rubble. 90% of buildings are destroyed or severely damaged. The 17 civilians found alive huddle in cellars beneath collapsed structures. American soldiers from both armies shake hands, exchange unit designations, pose for photographs that will document the moment. The images show exhausted men in filthy uniforms against backgrounds of total destruction. Visual representations of victory purchased through month-long struggle in the worst conditions imaginable. The operational significance of closing the Houffalize gap exceeds the symbolic importance. German forces still within the salient, approximately 18,000 soldiers when the gap closes, face choice between surrender and attempting to escape through increasingly narrow corridors. Over the next 48 hours, American forces capture thousands of prisoners, many suffering from frostbite, malnutrition, and exhaustion. Interrogations reveal that German units have been operating without adequate supply for over a week. Ammunition stocks are critically low. Food consists of whatever soldiers can scavenge. Medical care is non-existent beyond first aid. Many prisoners express relief at capture, preferring American POW camps to continued combat in hopeless circumstances. Yet substantial German forces escape the encirclement before it completely closes. Wehrmacht commanders, recognizing Hitler's stand-fast orders as delusional, authorize tactical withdrawals and position adjustments that amount to retreat. Panzer Lehr Division, reduced to approximately 40 tanks and 3,000 men, pulls back on January 14th, avoiding encirclement by hours. 5th Fallschirmjäger Division escapes south on January 15th. These successful withdrawals, while they save formations from capture, cannot disguise the operation's strategic failure. The equipment left behind, 450 vehicles confirmed, destroyed, or abandoned, 89 tanks and assault guns, hundreds of artillery pieces, thousands of small arms, represents losses Germany cannot replace. The human cost of the Houffalize operation, combining both armies' efforts, staggers commanders who review casualty reports. 3rd Army casualties, January 3rd through 16th, 3,400 killed, wounded, or missing. 1st Army casualties, same period, 2,900. German losses in the closing salient, approximately 6,000 killed, 18,000 captured, unknown thousands wounded. The question commanders privately ask, was closing this gap worth 6,000 American casualties? Could those resources have been better employed attacking elsewhere, bypassing the salient rather than reducing it? These questions, lacking definitive answers, reflect the brutal calculus of command, balancing casualties against objectives, measuring human lives against strategic gains. The photographic record of Houffalize's liberation documents destruction on scale typically associated with major European cities, not small Belgian towns. Every building shows damage. Most are collapsed ruins. The streets are impassable with rubble requiring engineer units days to clear. Unexploded ordnance litters the town, American shells that failed to detonate, German mines, booby traps. Graves registration units find over 300 bodies in the ruins, mixture of German soldiers, American soldiers, and Belgian civilians. In many cases, identification proves impossible, bodies burned or dismembered beyond recognition. These unidentified dead receive burial in temporary cemeteries with markers reading simply "unknown soldier" or "unknown civilian." Their final resting place is testimony to war's indiscriminate violence. On January 17th, Eisenhower tours Houffalize with Bradley and Montgomery. The Supreme Commander walks through ruins, observing engineers clearing rubble, medics treating Belgian civilians for malnutrition and exposure, Graves registration teams still recovering bodies. He speaks with soldiers from both armies, asking about their experiences, their needs, their morale. One soldier, when asked if the operation succeeded, responds, "We took the town, sir. Not sure the town was worth taking." Eisenhower doesn't reply. The question hangs in cold January air, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. Was this worth it? Will the soldiers who died here believe it was worth it? Can victory that costs so much and gains so little still be called victory? These questions follow Eisenhower back to his headquarters, where staff officers await strategic decisions about operations beyond Houffalize, beyond the Ardennes, toward Germany itself. January 20, 1945. Cemetery near Ham, Luxembourg. Staff Sergeant Robert Palmer, Graves Registration Unit, 329th Quartermaster Company, supervises the processing of 847 bodies recovered from Ardennes battlefields during the past week. The bodies arrive frozen solid, transported in trucks like cordwood, stacked with mechanical efficiency that disguises the human tragedy each represents. Palmer's job requires emotional detachment, process remains, identify when possible, prepare for burial, maintain records. He's performed this task since Normandy, has processed thousands of bodies, thought himself immune to emotional impact. But the Ardennes dead are different. Many froze in positions suggesting their final moments, hands still gripping weapons, mouths open in screams rendered eternal by freezing temperatures, eyes sometimes open, staring at nothing. Palmer processes the bodies mechanically, but nightmares will come later. The identification process combines bureaucracy with tragedy. Each body should carry identification tags, metal dog tags, stamped with name, service number, blood type, religion. But combat, especially combat involving artillery and explosions, frequently separates tags from bodies. Blast effects scatter remains across wide areas. Fire from burning vehicles destroys identification. Bodies that lay exposed for weeks before recovery may have tags scavenged by souvenir hunters or removed by fellow soldiers to report deaths. And Palmer's team relies on multiple identification methods. Tags when present, personal effects like letters or photographs, dental records when bodies reach collection points where dental officers work, physical descriptions matched against missing persons reports. Despite these efforts, approximately 12% of bodies remain unidentifiable. The statistical accounting of Third Army casualties for the Ardennes campaign creates ledger of loss that overwhelms commanders reviewing the numbers. Killed in action, 10,011. Wounded in action, 40,938. Missing in action, including captured, 17,441. These numbers represent approximately 68,000 casualties in 6 weeks, roughly 10,000 men per week, 1,500 per day. The killed in action number exceeds total American deaths in the Revolutionary War. The wounded exceeds total Union casualties at Gettysburg. The missing equals entire division strength. Numbers at this scale become abstract, too large for individual comprehension, yet each number represents a specific human being. Medical statistics reveal dimensions of loss beyond battlefield casualties. Frostbite casualties requiring evacuation, 15,000 men. Trench foot, 8,000. Hypothermia, 3,000. Combat exhaustion, 2,000. These non-battle casualties, totaling 28,000, exceed Third Army's killed in action by a factor of nearly 3. The implication? Winter itself inflicted more casualties than German forces. This ratio, shocking to commanders who anticipated combat losses but underestimated environmental factors, reshapes post-war military doctrine regarding winter operations. Future wars will see armies equipped with winter gear, supplied with cold-weather lubricants, trained for extreme temperature operations, all lessons written in the frozen bodies of Ardennes casualties. The comparison between Third Army's Ardennes casualties and earlier operations illuminates the campaign's exceptional violence. August through November 1944, Third Army advances from Normandy to German border, covering hundreds of miles, liberating France, capturing tens of thousands of German prisoners. Casualties during this 4-month period, approximately 45,000 total. December 1944 through January 1945, and Third Army fights in the Ardennes, advancing perhaps 50 miles net gain. Casualties, 68,000 total. Put differently, Third Army suffers 50% higher casualties in 6 weeks of Ardennes combat than in 4 months of the race across France. The Ardennes represents by any measure the most costly operation Third Army executes during the European War. German casualties inflicted by Third Army provide partial compensation for American losses, but cannot erase the human cost. Estimated German killed, facing Third Army, 24,000. German wounded, approximately 70,000. German captured, over 35,000. These numbers, based on captured records, prisoner interrogations, and battlefield assessments, suggest Third Army achieved favorable exchange ratios, inflicting approximately 2 German casualties for each American casualty. Military planners consider 2-to-1 acceptable, even favorable, but this clinical calculation ignores that Third Army chose this battle, while German forces fought it under compulsion. American casualties were, in some sense, voluntary, consequences of strategic decisions Eisenhower and Patton made. German casualties resulted from Hitler's orders that his soldiers could not refuse. The long-term medical consequences for wounded survivors create ongoing tragedy, extending decades beyond the war. Captain Robert Zimmerman, battalion surgeon, follows up with patients he treated during the Ardennes. Of the 2,300 wounded, he personally treated or supervised treatment for, as approximately 480 later require amputations. Limbs damaged by cold prove non-viable despite initial treatment. 750 suffer permanent disabilities, lost vision, hearing damage, paralysis from spinal injuries. 120 develop severe post-traumatic stress requiring psychiatric hospitalization. These long-term casualties, not reflected in official casualty statistics compiled during the war, represent the campaign's extended human cost. Men who survived the Ardennes but never fully recovered. The psychological toll on units that sustained heaviest casualties manifests in ways commanders struggle to address. Company K, 328th Infantry Regiment, suffers 73% casualties during Ardennes ease operations. Of the 190 men who entered combat December 22nd, 52 remain effective by January 28th. The survivors, scattered among replacement personnel who joined the company during January, no longer constitute a cohesive unit. The shared experiences, mutual trust, and collective identity that characterized the company before Ardennes are gone, replaced by a collection of traumatized veterans and inexperienced replacements. The company continues to fight, orders demanded, but unit cohesion, that intangible quality that makes military formations effective, has been shattered and will require months to rebuild. Memorial services held in late January attempt to provide closure for survivors and honor for the dead, but they cannot fully address the scale of loss. Chaplain James O'Neill conducts service on January 25th for Third Army headquarters personnel, remembering headquarters staff killed during the campaign. The names read aloud consumed 20 minutes. 214 individuals who worked in administration, logistics, intelligence, communications, all the unglamorous support roles that make armies function. These deaths, occurring primarily from artillery fire striking headquarters positions, receive little public attention, but leave gaps in organizational knowledge and experience that prove difficult to fill. O'Neill's homily addresses the question survivors ask: Why did they die while I survived? He offers traditional religious explanations: God's plan, higher purpose, sacrifice for just cause. Some listeners find comfort, others remain unconsoled, struggling with survivors' guilt that will persist lifelong. The comparison between pre-Ardennes and post-Ardennes Third Army reveals the campaign's transformative impact on the force itself. Divisions that attacked in mid-December, with veteran corps and relative cohesion, emerge in late January, reconstituted with replacement personnel who lack combat experience. The 4th Armored Division, Third Army's elite unit, receives over 3,000 replacements during January, approximately 30% of division strength. These replacements, fresh from training in the United States or recovered wounded returning to duty, dilute the experienced cadre that made 4th Armored effective. Similar patterns repeat across all Third Army divisions. The army that emerges from the Ardennes resembles its predecessor in designation and organization, but differs fundamentally in composition and character. The question that haunts Third Army's senior leadership in late January, rarely voiced but universally considered, concerns proportionality. Were the Ardennes casualties proportionate to strategic gains achieved? The campaign relieved Bastogne, prevented German forces from reaching the Meuse River, eliminated the salient threatening Allied supply lines. These outcomes hold genuine strategic value, but could they have been achieved at lower cost? Different tactics, better preparation, waiting for more favorable conditions? Might any of these alternatives have saved lives? Bradley privately writes in his diary, "We won, but I wonder if we won as well as we should have. The casualties suggest we could have done better." This self-criticism, a characteristic of professional officers who measure success not just by victories, but by efficiency of those victories, captures the moral weight commanders bear when reflecting on operations where thousands died under their orders. December 14th, 1944. Bletchley Park, England. The codebreakers who decrypted German communications through the Ultra program process, signals indicating significant German troop movements in the Eifel region opposite the Ardennes. Colonel Telford Taylor, American liaison officer at Bletchley, reviews intercepts mentioning 6th Panzer Army repositioning, fuel deliveries to forward areas, and increased radio traffic suggesting major operations planning. Taylor's report to Schaff intelligence includes specific warnings that German forces opposite the Ardennes have been substantially reinforced. The report reaches intelligence staff on December 15th. It is filed, evaluated as indicating defensive preparations rather than offensive intentions, and never forwarded to 1st Army headquarters or units holding the Ardennes sector. This failure, one of many preceding the German offensive, exemplifies the intelligence catastrophe that allowed the attack to achieve complete surprise. The systematic underestimation of German capabilities begins with flawed assumptions embedded in Allied intelligence assessments. By December 1944, Allied intelligence officers widely believe Germany lacks resources for major offensive operations. This belief, all supported by months of German retreats and declining German industrial output, creates cognitive framework where evidence contradicting the belief gets discounted or reinterpreted. When reconnaissance flights photograph German tank concentrations near the Ardennes, intelligence officers interpret these as reserves being held for defensive operations. When prisoner interrogations reveal soldiers discussing offensive training, officers dismiss it as disinformation or exaggeration. The assumption that Germany cannot attack becomes self-reinforcing, filtering out accurate information that challenges the assumption. 1st Army intelligence estimates from December 15th illustrate this analytical failure perfectly. The formal estimate, distributed to corps and division commanders, assesses enemy forces opposite the Ardennes as incapable of major offensive operations and predicts German strategy as defensive in nature with limited counterattack capability. This estimate, written hours before the largest German offensive on the Western Front since 1940, represents intelligence failure of stunning magnitude. The officer who wrote it, Colonel Benjamin Monk Dixon, later admits he ignored information suggesting offensive preparations because it didn't fit broader analytical framework. Dixon's honest self-assessment. We saw what we expected to see and discounted what contradicted our expectations. The contrast between the First Army intelligence assessments and Third Army's Oscar Koch's analysis reveals how individual analytical skill can overcome institutional biases. Koch, while reviewing same information available to First Army, reaches opposite conclusions. His December 12th estimate warns of German offensive capabilities in the Ardennes sector and identifies specific units that might participate. His December 15th estimate, issued day before the attack, predicts possible major German counteroffensive within 72 hours. Third Army staff takes Koch's warnings seriously, which explains Patton's contingency planning. But Koch's warnings don't reach First Army. Different armies maintain separate intelligence staffs with minimal cross-communication. The officer who correctly predicted the offensive commanded no forces in position to stop it. The actual German strength that attacked on December 16th vastly exceeds every Allied estimate. And intelligence predicted approximately 100,000 German troops with perhaps 400 tanks might be present in the Eifel region. The reality? 250,000 troops, 1,400 tanks, and assault guns, supporting artillery exceeding 1,800 pieces. This represents intelligence underestimation by factor of 2.5 for personnel, 3.5 for armor. Put differently, Allied commanders prepared for battle against force less than half the size they actually faced. This miscalculation, combined with the thinly spread American defensive positions in the Ardennes, guaranteed initial German success, regardless of American tactical competence. The 8th Corps frontage illuminates how intelligence failures combined with force deployment decisions to create catastrophe. The Corps held 85 miles of front with 4 divisions: the 4th Infantry Division, 28th Infantry Division, 90th Infantry Division, and 106th Infantry Division. Military doctrine suggests divisions defend frontages of approximately 10 to 15 miles maximum. 8th Corps divisions averaged over 20 miles each, double the doctrinal maximum. This overstretched deployment reflected intelligence assessments that the Ardennes represented quiet sector where minimal German activity could be expected. When 14 German divisions attacked 8th Corps positions, the defensive line collapsed within hours, not because American soldiers fought poorly, but because positions designed to hold against light pressure could not withstand major assault. Yet the post-war interrogation of German commanders reveals information that makes Allied intelligence failures more comprehensible while not excusing them. General Feldmarschall Gerd von Rundstedt, overall commander of German forces in the West, states in May 1945 interrogation that he expected Allied intelligence to detect offensive preparations and nearly recommended canceling the attack when detection didn't occur. Rundstedt's operations officer, General Lieutenant Siegfried Westphal, describes German surprise at achieving surprise. We concentrated over 200,000 men and 1,500 tanks in small area. We believed this could not possibly escape detection. When we attacked and found American forces completely unprepared, we could hardly believe our fortune. German commanders benefited from Allied intelligence failure, but didn't engineer it. Allied forces simply failed to see what should have been visible. The systemic issues that enabled intelligence failure extended beyond individual analytical errors. The Allied intelligence system in December 1944 suffered from several structural problems. First, compartmentalization. Ultra-intelligence could not be widely distributed for security reasons, limiting its operational impact. Second, hierarchy. Field intelligence from patrols and reconnaissance often failed to reach senior commanders who might recognize its significance. Third, confirmation bias. Analysts sought information confirming existing assessments rather than challenging them. Fourth, an optimism bias. The natural human tendency to believe good news and discount bad created analytical environment where evidence of German weakness received more credence than evidence of German strength. These structural problems, common in military intelligence organizations, combine to create perfect conditions for catastrophic surprise. The intelligence failure's consequences extended beyond the initial shock. Even after the German offensive began, Allied intelligence continued underestimating German strength and objectives. First Army intelligence estimates on December 17th still describe the attack as limited counteroffensive, rather than recognizing it as major strategic operation. By December 19th, when the offensive scope became undeniable, Allied intelligence still underestimated German reserves available to exploit the breakthrough. These continued analytical failures complicated the Allied response, causing commanders to allocate insufficient forces initially, and only gradually recognize the operation's true scale. More accurate intelligence wouldn't have prevented the initial breakthrough, but it might have enabled faster, more appropriate response. The question of accountability for intelligence failure remains contentious among historians and survivors. Who bears responsibility? Individual intelligence officers who discounted accurate information? Commanders who failed to demand better analysis? The intelligence system's structural flaws? Or perhaps the inevitable fog of war that makes perfect intelligence impossible? Post-war investigations assign partial blame across all these categories, while acknowledging that intelligence failure of this magnitude typically results from multiple factors combining in unfortunate ways. General Eisenhower's post-war reflection captures this complex causality. The intelligence failure was systemic, not individual. We all believed Germany was beaten. We were wrong. That mistake cost thousands of lives. The final irony. The intelligence failure that allowed German surprise actually benefited Allied forces strategically. If Allied intelligence had detected the German offensive preparations and canceled the attack through preemptive strikes, German forces would have remained intact as strategic reserve. Instead, the Ardennes offensive consumed Germany's last substantial reserves in futile operation that hastened final German collapse. From coldly strategic perspective, the intelligence failure that cost tens of thousands of casualties in December to January may have saved hundreds of thousands of casualties by shortening the war overall. This brutal calculus, calculated by staff officers but never spoken aloud to soldiers who fought in the Ardennes, represents war's fundamental immorality, where individual tragedy serves strategic purpose, where deaths become statistics in equations that balance losses against gains. December the 28th, 1944. Bastogne, Belgium. War correspondent Cornelius Ryan arrives via the corridor, commissioned by Collier's magazine to write the story of the relief. And then Ryan finds a narrative perfectly structured for dramatic journalism. Surrounded garrison fights, desperate battle, relief force races through winter storms, breakthrough achieved against impossible odds, heroic general delivers on promise. Ryan interviews soldiers, photographs devastation, collects quotes designed to convey both heroism and suffering. His article, published in February, will title The Siege of Bastogne and present the relief as primarily 4th Armored Division's achievement under Patton's leadership. The article never mentions the 26th or 80th Infantry Divisions, except in passing references to supporting forces. This initial framing, repeated across dozens of similar articles, begins transforming complex military operation involving multiple divisions into simple story centered on single commander. The war correspondence system, designed to inform American public about military operations while maintaining morale, inherently favors simple narratives over complex truth. Reporters face word limits, editorial preferences for heroic stories, and military censorship that restricts what can be published. The result: they simplify. Multi-division operations become single-division achievements. Complex failures become dramatic, near disasters overcome by individual brilliance. Statistical casualties become humanizing anecdotes. Ryan, a skilled and honest journalist, operates within these constraints. His article accurately describes 4th Armored Division's operations. What it doesn't do, can't do, given space and narrative requirements, is convey the fuller picture where infantry divisions fought equally hard for less recognition. General Patton's relationship with press proves symbiotic and calculating. He understands that public perception influences military assignments, that generals who capture public imagination receive resources and opportunities others don't. Patton grants journalists access, provides quotable statements, performs his aggressive persona for cameras. The famous photograph from January 3rd, Patton standing in tank turret, pearl-handled revolvers visible, jaw set, staring toward German lines. Results from staged photo opportunity, where Patton held pose for 10 minutes, while photographers found optimal angles. Patton later admits in private correspondence, "I give them the show they want. They write stories that help me get the missions I want. Everyone benefits." This cynical but effective media strategy shapes how Bastogne's relief enters public consciousness. The 72-hour claim, central to Patton mythology, illustrates how imprecise statements become definitive facts through repetition. At Verdun, Patton said, Third Army could attack with 3 divisions on December 22nd, 72 hours from the conference. This statement, accurate regarding when the attack began, gets simplified in press accounts to Patton turned his entire army 90 degrees in 72 hours. This simplified version, more dramatic but less accurate, appears in hundreds of newspaper articles. By the time official histories are written, the simplified version has displaced the complex reality. The truth that Patton's staff began preliminary planning before Verdun, that actual movement took longer than 72 hours for many units, that turning an army is continuous process rather than discrete event, gets lost in narrative convenience. The comparison between Patton's public image and professional military assessments reveals the gap between mythology and reality. American military historians, writing for professional audiences, credit Patton's Ardennes performance as competent and aggressive, but not exceptional. The official U.S. Army history notes that Third Army's movement north proceeded adequately given available time, and that operations against the southern shoulder achieved objectives at acceptable casualty rates. This measured assessment, appropriate for professional military analysis, and contrasts sharply with popular accounts describing Patton's performance as miraculous or genius. Both assessments contain truth. Patton's performance was competent, perhaps excellent, but excellence in military command differs from miracles. The death of Patton in December 1945, from injuries sustained in automobile accident, crystallizes his image at moment of triumph. He dies before post-war investigations might complicate his reputation, before peacetime controversies might tarnish his legend, at the peak of public adulation for the general who saved Bastogne. This timing, entirely accidental, proves fortunate for Patton's historical reputation. Compare to Bradley, who lives decades longer and whose post-war statements sometimes contradict his wartime image, or Eisenhower, whose presidential years complicate his military reputation. Patton remains frozen in time as the aggressive victorious commander, immune to the revisions that affect long-lived generals. The 1970 film Patton, starring George C. Scott, transforms public understanding of the Ardennes campaign for generations. The film condenses Third Army's operations into montage, Patton at Verdun making his promise, tanks rolling north through snow, breakthrough to Bastogne. Screen time devoted to these events, approximately 12 minutes in a 3-hour film. But those 12 minutes, brilliantly crafted and dramatically compelling, create definitive popular image of the campaign. Viewers who watch the film leave theaters believing they understand what happened. And what they understand is simplified narrative where Patton's will and determination overcome impossible odds through sheer force of personality. The film never shows the 26th Infantry Division's grinding advance or the 80th Infantry Division's casualties. It doesn't need to. The Patton-centric narrative tells satisfying story without these complications. Veterans' responses to the mythology vary widely and reveal class dimensions often ignored in popular histories. Tankers from 4th Armored Division generally embrace the narrative. Their division gets recognized, their sacrifices acknowledged, even if Patton receives disproportionate credit. Infantry from the 26th and 80th Divisions express bitterness. Private First Class Anthony Russo, 328th Infantry Regiment, Bulge writes in 1965, "I've seen the movies, read the books. They all say Patton's tanks saved Bastogne. Nobody mentions the infantry that saved Patton's tanks. We fought just as hard. We died just as often. But history forgot us because tanks photograph better than muddy infantry." This sense of historical injustice, common among infantry veterans, reflects accurate perception that popular memory selectively honors certain units while forgetting others. The strategic assessment of Third Army's Ardennes performance, when divorced from Patton mythology, reveals good but not exceptional execution. Third Army achieved its primary objective, relieving Bastogne, but at higher casualties than preliminary estimates suggested necessary. The Army's flexibility and rapid deployment demonstrated organizational competence more than individual genius. Logistics staff, division commanders, corps commanders all contributed to success through professional skill rather than dramatic inspiration. Post-war professional military analysis emphasizes these systemic factors, noting that successful operations typically result from organizational excellence rather than individual brilliance. But organizational excellence makes poor narrative. Individual genius creates compelling stories. So Patton becomes the story, and the organization that enabled his success fades into background. The question historians debate: does mythology serve useful purpose even when it simplifies truth? Arguments in favor suggest that Patton mythology inspired soldiers during and after the war, and provided American public with heroes when heroes were needed, created cultural touchstone that bonds veterans through shared narrative. Arguments against contend that mythology obscures lessons that might inform future operations, dishonors soldiers whose contributions get forgotten, and creates unrealistic expectations about military leadership. Both perspectives hold validity. The mythology machine that transformed complex military operation into Patton's legendary relief of Bastogne serves functions beyond historical accuracy. It provides meaning, creates identity, offers heroic narrative in war, otherwise characterized by grinding attrition and industrial-scale death. The final irony, Patton himself might have appreciated the mythology despite its factual liberties. He spent his career cultivating aggressive image and performing the role of warrior general, understanding that military command involves theater as much as tactics. In private letters, Patton sometimes expressed frustration with press simplifications, but he never publicly corrected accounts that exaggerated his role. He understood that generals who become legends receive better assignments than generals who remain professional but anonymous. Whether Patton's relief of Bastogne represents military genius or competent execution of well-prepared plans matters less, ultimately, than what the story provides. Proof that American forces could respond to crisis with speed and effectiveness, validation that aggressive leadership achieves results, reassurance that even desperate situations can be overcome. These psychological functions, served by the Patton mythology, and perhaps justify the simplifications and omissions that historical accuracy demands we acknowledge. May 8, 1945, Third Army positions, Czechoslovakia. Victory in Europe Day. Captain James Leach, who commanded tanks during the December advance toward Bastogne, stands with his company celebrating Germany's surrender. The celebration proves subdued. Champagne and shouting happen elsewhere, at headquarters removed from combat. Here, soldiers mostly feel relief and exhaustion. Leach reflects on the journey from Bastogne to this moment. His company lost 29 tanks during the Ardennes campaign, 57 men killed, 114 wounded. Most of the soldiers surrounding him are replacements, men who joined after January and never experienced the winter campaign. When Leach tries to explain what Bastogne meant, all what it cost, he finds words inadequate. The weight of winter resists simple explanation. The strategic impact of the Ardennes campaign shapes the war's final months in ways both obvious and subtle. Most obviously, the German offensive consumed reserves that might have delayed Allied advances into Germany. The 24,000 German soldiers killed, 70,000 wounded, 35,000 captured represent losses Germany can never replace. Equipment destroyed, over 800 armored vehicles, hundreds of artillery pieces, thousands of trucks, depletes German logistics beyond recovery. The offensive's failure also destroys Hitler's credibility with his remaining generals, creating command paralysis where field commanders no longer trust directives from Berlin. These tangible effects shorten the war, although measuring exactly how much remains speculative. Less obviously, but perhaps more significantly, The Ardennes demonstrates to Soviet forces observing from the east that German strategic reserves have been exhausted. Stalin, planning the Vistula-Oder offensive scheduled for January 12, initially expected German forces to defend vigorously using reserves Hitler was holding. When those reserves get consumed in the Ardennes instead, Soviet forces encounter weaker resistance than anticipated. The Vistula-Oder offensive advances over 300 miles in 3 weeks, reaching positions outside Berlin by February. Without the Ardennes drawing German reserves west, Soviet advance might have been slower, potentially altering the war's end timeline and post-war occupation zones. The Ardennes campaign's strategic significance thus extends beyond Western Front to influence European war's entire final phase. The doctrinal lessons American military draws from Ardennes reshape how future wars are planned and fought. The Army Command and General Staff College adds Ardennes case study to curriculum in 1946, focusing on rapid deployment logistics, winter warfare challenges, and intelligence failure analysis. Specific lessons codified include necessity of proper winter equipment before operations begin, importance of flexible logistics planning that allows rapid reallocation, dangers of thinly spread defensive positions, requirement for robust intelligence analysis that challenges assumptions. These lessons influence American military planning through Korean War, on where winter conditions again challenge operations, and into Cold War planning for potential combat in European winter conditions. The Third Army's movement north becomes template for rapid deployment doctrine that persists into the 21st century. Military planners studying how Third Army moved over 130,000 vehicles in 72 hours identify principles applicable to future operations. Pre-positioned contingency plans, ruthless prioritization of combat over support units, acceptance of calculated logistical risks, and aggressive traffic management. These principles inform American deployment planning for decades. During Operation Desert Shield in 1990, when American forces deployed to Saudi Arabia, logistics officers explicitly reference Ardennes' experience as proof that massive forces can be deployed rapidly when necessity demands. The technological details differ. Modern armies use container ships and aircraft rather than truck convoys, but fundamental principles remain constant. The casualty statistics from the Ardennes influence post-war military medicine and personnel policies. The 15,000 frostbite casualties prompt medical research into cold weather injury prevention and treatment. New equipment gets developed, vapor barrier boots that prevent trench foot, insulated gloves allowing weapons handling, layered clothing systems managing moisture. Personnel policies change to recognize environmental casualties as service-connected injuries deserving medical care and benefits. The veterans suffering long-term effects from frostbite or hypothermia receive disability compensation. These policy changes, directly traceable to Ardennes' experience, improve how military organizations care for soldiers exposed to extreme environmental conditions. The memorial landscape of the Ardennes preserves physical sites where Americans fought and died. Bastogne hosts the Martyrs Memorial, dedicated 1950, honoring American forces who fought in the battle. The memorial's architecture, a 5-pointed star with walls listing unit designations, attempts to commemorate all participants, not just 4th Armored Division. Henri Chapelle American Cemetery contains 7,990 American war dead, many from Ardennes campaign. Luxembourg American Cemetery holds 5,076 graves, including Patton himself, who requested burial among his soldiers. These cemeteries, maintained by American Battle Monuments Commission, provide physical locations where the war's memory persists beyond individual recollection. The question of what should be remembered about Third Army's Ardennes campaign evolves as veterans age and historical perspective lengthens. Early post-war accounts emphasized heroism, victory against odds, Patton's leadership. 1960s and 70s accounts, influenced by Vietnam War skepticism, question whether casualties were justified, whether alternative strategies existed, whether glory narratives obscure ugly realities. 21st century accounts, written after most veterans have died, Attempt balanced assessment, acknowledging both achievement and cost. O, recognizing complexity, resisting simple heroic or critical framings. Each generation reinterprets the Ardennes through its own values and experiences, ensuring the campaign's meaning remains contested and alive. The survivors themselves, aging through post-war decades, carry the weight of winter in ways outsiders struggle to understand. Many veterans refuse to discuss their Ardennes experiences, finding memories too painful or believing explanations inadequate. Others speak compulsively, driven by need to testify, to ensure others know what happened, to find meaning in survival. Private Eugene Luciano, 4th Armored Division, writes in 2010 at age 86, "I'm the last one left from my crew. They're all gone now, killed in the war or died after. I remember every one of them. I remember the cold. I remember being scared. I remember thinking we'd never make it, but we did make it, most of us anyway. I don't know what it means that I survived and they didn't. I just know I owe it to them to remember." This burden of memory shared by survivors represents the campaign's true weight, not just what happened, but what it means to have lived through it while others didn't. The technological lessons from the Ardennes extend beyond military applications. Post-war petroleum engineering incorporates Ardennes' experience with fuel gelling, developing additives that prevent diesel fuel problems in cold weather. Automotive manufacturers study winter vehicle performance, improving cold weather starting systems. Textile research into layered insulation systems yields advances in civilian cold weather clothing. These technological spillovers, rarely acknowledged, represent ways military challenges drive innovation with broader applications. The soldiers who suffered through -20-degree temperatures in inadequate clothing indirectly enable future developments in cold weather technology, benefiting millions of civilians. The final assessment historians offer depends on which metrics they emphasize. By casualty exchange ratios, Third Army performed well, inflicting approximately 2 German casualties for each American casualty. By territorial gains, performance appears less impressive, 50 miles advanced at cost of 68,000 casualties. By strategic impact, the campaign succeeded brilliantly, preventing German breakthrough, exhausting German reserves, shortening the war. By human cost, the operation seems tragically expensive, 10,000 Americans killed in 6 weeks. All these assessments contain truth. The Ardennes campaign was simultaneously successful and costly, necessary and tragic, a demonstration of American military capability, and a cautionary lesson about winter warfare's challenges. The last Third Army Ardennes veteran, a designation that shifts as survivors age and die, carries special burden of being final witness. Sergeant Robert Martinez, 104th Infantry Regiment, 26th Infantry Division, becomes last known survivor in 2019 at age 94. In his final interview, Martinez describes visiting Bastogne Memorial in 2018. "I stood there reading names on the wall, so many names, some I recognized, guys I knew, guys I fought beside, most I didn't know. But they were all there for the same reason I was there, because our country sent us, and we went. We did what we were ordered to do. A lot of us died doing it. I don't know if anyone today understands what it was like. Maybe they don't need to understand, maybe it's enough that we did it, and they're free because of it." Martinez dies in 2020, ending the direct human connection to Third Army's winter campaign. The weight of winter persists beyond individual memory, embedded in historical record, preserved in memorials, analyzed in military studies, commemorated in ceremonies. The Third Army's relief of Bastogne remains one of American military history's defining operations. Not the largest, not the bloodiest, not the most strategically significant, but perhaps the most dramatic. The combination of desperate circumstances, a rapid response, winter conditions, and ultimate success creates narrative that resonates across generations. Whether future generations remember it as Patton's triumph or as collective achievement of thousands of soldiers, whether they emphasize the heroism or the cost, whether they draw lessons about leadership or caution about winter warfare, all these framings preserve the essential truth. In the winter of 1944 through 45, 250,000 American soldiers fought through frozen hell to stop German offensive, relieve surrounded garrison, and demonstrate that American forces could respond to crisis with speed and effectiveness that neither enemy nor ally anticipated. They paid for this demonstration with blood and suffering measured in tens of thousands of casualties. They succeeded anyway. That success, and its cost, define the weight of winter that survivors carried lifelong, and that history preserves for future understanding.